I sat at my desk in the home office, downloading photos I had taken at Susan's office picnic the day before. I felt unusually relaxed, still basking in the aftermath of an unforgettable night. After taking me home from the yacht club, she screwed my brains out. "That should hold you until I get back Friday night," she teased after the third round sometime during the night. I couldn't quite put my finger on what had gotten into her, besides me, of course. I tried to recall the last time we'd had sex like that. For months, things between us had felt routine. Not that we didn't both enjoy ourselves, but it had been more mechanical than passionate, as if she were just going through the motions. This crisp, early autumn Sunday morning, I drove her to the Venice airport, where she caught a commuter jet to Atlanta for a week-long legal conference. Susan was a successful lawyer in town and a partner in a firm of 20. We'd been married for 23 years, and she had gone back to school to earn her law degree after our daughters started first grade. She excelled in her field, specializing in real estate law, and we had ridden the wave of Florida's booming property market together. Even during downturns, Susan thrived, thanks to her expertise in foreclosures and similar areas. Our daughters, Rachel and Laura, were both in college now, leaving us as empty nesters. Naively, I'd assumed this would mean more time for us to reconnect and enjoy spontaneous moments together, like making love. But that hadn't happened. I missed the closeness we once shared. It felt as though my best friend had slowly drifted away from me. I also knew Susan had struggled with her 45th birthday a few months ago. She had taken it hard, refusing to even acknowledge it, as if ignoring the milestone could somehow stop time. So, while she was working the long hours, I spent more time on my 43-foot sailboat, Lady Diana. After being turned down so many times over the months, I just stopped asking Susan to go along. After a while, I found I enjoyed the solitude. I was lucky I owned my own security business, and I had 260 loyal employees who for the most part had been with me for years. The last 10 years had been particularly good, and we really didn't need Susan's salary, but she refused my request that she slow down a bit so we could spend more time together. A few times I wondered if she had found someone to replace me, but I always dismissed the thought. I couldn't imagine such a thing. Lately I had toyed with the idea of putting some of my own assets to work monitoring her movements. Yes, checking up on her. But I just couldn't. I was like lots of others, afraid to know the answer. It would have been easy, since I had access to all the latest electronics. I also had a staff that would do anything for me. The problem was I was ashamed to let anyone know my suspicions, even if they turned out to be unfounded. Ashamed I even had these thoughts. Maybe I was just crazy, and as Susan said, she was just working hard for our future. I wondered how much money she thought we needed. We had a house that was paid for and now too big for us near the beach, 2 luxury cars, a pickup, and an SUV. Plus, I had my Harley, which Susan absolutely hated. I rode it every chance I got. Midlife crises? Maybe. But I loved the feel of that big bike. A maid cleaned the house and a gardener kept up the outside, and the pool maintenance people took care of that. So, with all this free time, she worked longer hours, and I seemed to work less and spend more time on the boat. So, there I was on that bright Sunday morning downloading photos, and I stopped and looked at one which was particularly good. It was a portrait close-up of Susan smiling. I had seen that look before, that loving look as she turned that smile on me over the years. This is where in the movies the sound guy would cue the car wreck sound. I got out of my chair and slowly walked to the liquor cabinet and poured myself a large measure of Jack Daniels to quell the feelings of nausea and sadness that swept over me as I realized what the picture meant. I sat down and stared at her smiling, loving face on the screen, and I knew I had not taken that photo. Yes, it was my camera, and I had left it on the table where we were seated while I went to get drinks or something, but I knew I had not taken it, but I suspected who did. One of the new associates, Ethan Parker, had been hanging around Susan all afternoon. It seemed every time I left her side he was there when I got back. Now that I thought about it, I seemed to remember he had been leaning over Susan as I came back with drinks one time. I just knew he had picked up the small digital camera from the table and snapped a few of Susan. He probably thought it was her camera and was being cute. Maybe he wanted one for himself. Susan probably thought it was harmless, but she didn't understand. I knew that look. Susan had reserved that look for me during our marriage, and now she was having an affair with that piece of shit. Yes, piece of shit. Mr. Ethan Parker was as smarmy as they come. Mr. 30-year-old beach boy look with his blonde hair and blue eyes and constant fake sincerity, always sucking up to the bosses. Now I knew he was doing more than sucking up, and I understood the patronizing looks he gave me every time I was around him. Damn, I wondered if everyone in the firm knew it. Had I been the laughing stock of the party yesterday? On reflection, I doubted it. Nathan Brown, the senior partner, would not have put up with it. I considered him a friend, and we golfed regularly. No, somehow, They had managed to keep it quiet, but I wondered how much longer. Now there was nothing to do but go ahead and catch them in the act. I knew in my gut that they were both at the conference in Atlanta. Was last night a mercy sex? A farewell sex? She was going to Atlanta for a week and be with her lover. I wondered how many times over the months she had done exactly that. My firm, Secure Shield Solutions, or SSS, was more than met the eye. I had government contracts and provided private security for diplomats and visiting dignitaries, and some of the consulates and embassies in Miami. We had branches in Europe and the Caribbean now, and I had a staff of 20 in Iraq and was about to send a team to assess the security situation for some clients who were contractors in Afghanistan. I also had the most sophisticated electronic devices ever made. Some were from my in-house techies who could and would modify stuff from the outside and make it better, smaller, stronger, and give it more range. I didn't think Susan had a clue about all that SSS encompassed and the worth of the company. Of course, I drew a salary, but the rest went back into the company, and that meant paying top dollar for good people and making sure we were always the leaders in technology. At 45, I was at the top of my game, and my senior staff probably ran the company better when I was out on the boat. Jacob Whitaker, my number 2, was a brilliant engineer and also a damn good manager. I knew I could count on him for discretion, and he would have things wrapped up quickly. But I didn't want to put Jacob in that spot. He and his wife Nancy were good friends of ours. I picked up one of my scramble phones. It used a modified military hardware and software that encrypted everything. See? Tio, I need a favor. Anything. Mi amigo. Tio wasn't his name. It simply meant uncle, but we had been doing business for about a dozen years. Tio was the head of a large organization that was involved in lots of businesses around the world. I was a consultant for him, but never in public or on anyone's books. I would get him devices and data, and he would pay me cash. The cash never went into any accounts. It went into Tio's bank. I knew a lot about his business, probably enough to get me killed, but he did trust me even though I was a gringo and not family. I trusted him and I believed him when he said his businesses never involved drugs or prostitution. Regardless, I knew I had plenty of money in the Tio bank, and I was also in the position to ask for a favor because it was my intelligence gathering that uncovered a plot by a rival group from Colombia to assassinate his family. I also knew Tio would help me, and I would never hear anything about it from others. Not that I couldn't trust my team, but when a marriage goes south, the opportunities for leaks rise dramatically. No, I had decided I would ask Tio for help. Out of necessity, our phone conversations were always short. I told him she was staying at the Hyatt Regency Atlanta. He already knew what she looked like, but his people would need a photo. It seemed appropriate to transmit one of the photos Ethan had taken. If she was with Ethan, she'd certainly be looking like she did in that photo. It sickened me to look at her face, the woman I had loved all my adult life. How many times had I imagined the two of us setting sail across the Gulf without any cares, for a voyage without time limits? That was over, destroyed by Susan's infidelity. Could I be wrong? I knew in my soul that the way she looked at Ethan doomed our marriage. The camera image was not wrong. Susan had her own agenda now, her own future, which did not include me. She badly underestimated me if she thought I would accept her infidelity. Tio said he'd be back to me soon, and I knew he would. I'm very sorry, amigo. Then he disconnected. Could I have them killed? Yes. Tio would do that for me, but this was not a death offense. It was a grievous wound to my pride, and the hurt would take a long time to heal. I also realized that I couldn't ask Tio to do that because somehow he would lose respect for me. He always thought of me as a cool-headed guy who could solve the thorniest problems. Of course, this was more than a thorny problem, but I would keep my cool. I did know I never wanted to see Susan again. If Tio's people came up with the evidence I figured they would find, then I needed to plan for the rest of my life. A life without my wife, friend, and lover. The sadness and nausea I felt was replaced by quiet rage. Short of killing them, how could I make them pay? My phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. Relieved it wasn't Susan, otherwise I would have let it go to voicemail. I knew it was unlikely I would ever talk to her again. Venice, Florida wasn't a big town, and unless one of us left, we would be always bumping into each other. Maybe it was time for my boat trip. Hi, honey. How you doing? It was my daughter, Laura Burley. Doing great, Dad. It's so much easier the second year, isn't it? I smiled thinking about last year when we delivered her to Emory University in Atlanta. Then I winced with the memory of how Susan and I drove up with her to get her situated in the dorm, and how Susan had cried on the way home about her baby leaving. I wondered if that was what set off the affair. Did she feel lonely or old or unwanted? She didn't look anywhere near 45. She hardly looked 40, with her auburn hair and green eyes and her perfectly toned body. She swam and worked out about 5 days a week and there had never been an ounce of fat on her 5'9" frame. She was beautiful, looked like a model, and I always took the time to tell her and show her how much I appreciated her. Ruefully, I thought, fat lot of good that did. So what's up? I was wondering when Mom was coming this way. I haven't gotten an email, but I thought she mentioned a conference in Atlanta. I wondered if I should tell her adulterous mother was already in Atlanta and might not be interested in spending time with her daughter, particularly this week. If they did meet, would Laura be able to detect that her mother was screwing another man in the Hyatt? I decided that I needed to act ignorant of the affair and encourage Laura to visit with Susan. Might actually be fun to cause Susan some discomfort. Laura, she's already in Atlanta, left this morning. When you called, I thought it might be her. Oh, guess you could try her on her cell. Wonder why she didn't call or email. Oh, you know your mother these days. Always busy. There was a pause. Sure, but don't you get tired of it? Alarm bells started going off. What did my youngest daughter know? She had been home off and on most of the summer. What did she suspect? Did she know something? She's just really involved in her career right now. I knew it was lame as soon as I said it. Dad, are you all right? Sure, honey. I'm fine. Business is going great. And I'm thinking about taking the Lady Diana out for a few days this coming week. Can't let your mother have all the fun. Now, why did I say that? Dad, I love you. I love you too, Laura. I really miss you around here. Although I won't miss all those guys who are always hanging around. I chuckled. But I bet you'll miss Jamie, Carolyn, and Tracy in their tiny suits. Laura, I never even noticed. She laughed. It was nice to hear her laugh. I really did miss her. Well, they certainly looked at you. Those three have the serious hots for you. Come on. They all too young and beautiful to be thinking about an old guy like me. I'm just a dad, right? Then don't encourage any of them. They want to jump your bones. Laura, well, it's true. Besides being a hunk, you know how to treat a woman. I expect they'd trade those pretty boys for you in a heartbeat. So watch out. Enough. But thanks. Makes an old man feel good. I laughed. You're far from old, and lots of my friends would be happy to be hanging on your arm. Why was my daughter boosting my ego like this? I did work out and I was always fit and I had the girls out on the boat a few times, and I had to admit I still looked pretty good in a swimsuit, but damn, I had to work on it harder than when I was younger. Suddenly serious, she said. Dad, take good care of yourself. I hear there's a storm in the Caribbean that's heading your way, so be careful out in the Gulf. You know me. Always the fair weather sailor. Right. She knew I was an experienced sailor and bad weather hardly fazed me. Guess I'll try Mom on her cell. And if you get hold of her, tell her to give me a call. I just said that to make it sound like I cared. Maybe I'll just go over to the Hyatt and surprise her. That might be fun. I know my voice sounded hollow, although it would be interesting if Laura caught her mother with Ethan. But the question was, did she already know or suspect? Had she spotted that freshly screwed glow times when I was gone? I wish I wasn't so far away. Oh, you're just a short flight away, and you'll be home for Thanksgiving? Maybe I'll come down sooner. Would you mind? I'd love it. Okay. I'll see how my classes go, and let you know. Maybe in about a month? Sounds wonderful. Okay. Dad, see you then. And Dad. Yes? Just don't ever forget I love you. I never could, honey. I love you very much. And Dad, be careful out there on the boat. I'm much too young to be an orphan. I will. Bye. Bye, honey. I sat there and thought about our conversation. Laura was strangely subdued at the end, and then it occurred to me what she said about being an orphan. How could that be? If something happened to me, she'd still have her mother. Or would she? Was it a slip of the tongue? No. She knew, or suspected what her mother was doing, and decided that she would already take sides. I was saddened by that thought, but proud my baby was protective of me and would not accept her mother's infidelity. Did her friends really think I was a hunk? I went to the garage and fired up my Harley and rode to the harbor. For the next few hours I sat on board the Lady Diana, drank beer, and thought things over. Occasionally, I would jot a note on a yellow pad and get out a nautical chart. What if I was wrong about Susan? I didn't think I was, but for the sake of argument, what if? I decided that regardless I would take Lady Diana in 6 months, kind of a sabbatical and vacation rolled into one. Maybe even make it a part business trip to scout for new business in South and Central America. Jacob could run things without me, and with all the sophisticated comm gear on board, he could reach me anywhere. And what about Susan? Well, if she wasn't unfaithful, then being apart might be a good thing to remind us both what we saw in each other in the first place. If after a 6-month separation we couldn't find our way back, then I'd propose an amicable divorce and we could get on with our lives. If she was unfaithful, it would be just the right thing to get out of town. As I said, Venice is not a big town. It has maybe 20,000 people, and there are maybe 90,000 in the whole 5-city area, so I would find somewhere else to live. I enjoyed Florida, grew up there, but maybe someplace like San Diego. Laura and Rachel would love it there. Sort of like Florida, without the humidity, hurricanes, and large bugs. With a plan taking shape, I started making a list of the things I'd need and to do before setting off on my adventure. A trip like this would normally take a couple of weeks to prepare for. I had 4 days. Fortunately, Diana had just come out of a refit that had her sleek and polished. Whatever Susan was up to, I decided I'd be well out into the Gulf before she got home on Friday. I started making calls. At 11 on Monday morning, I got the call from Tio that set my new plans in motion. "I'm sorry, Chris." He almost never called me by my name. I knew the news was bad. The maid said she didn't spend last night in her room. Then room service delivered to Mr. Parker's room dinner for 2 last night and breakfast for 2 this morning. They were wearing hotel robes when he delivered. When the maid changed the sheets in Mr. Parker's room this morning, there was evidence of sex. I didn't say anything. It was what I expected, but even so it was like a punch to the gut. "I'm sorry, amigo. What can I do?" "Thank you, Tio. I won't forget your kindness. I owe you a debt." "No, I owe you more than I can ever repay. I'm taking the boat and going on a trip for a few months. I'll stay in touch. Be well, my friend." For once he said friend instead of amigo. That meant a lot. My next call was to Jacob Whitaker, asking him to meet me in my office at noon. "What's up, boss?" I pushed my letter of resignation across the desk at him. He looked at the letter and then at me. "What's going on?" "Jacob, I've decided it's time to take my boat on that trip around the world I've always put off to someday." "Kinda sudden, isn't it? Is Susan going along?" I think he knew the answer before he even asked. I shook my head and the realities dawned on him. He spent the next half hour trying to talk me out of it, but I was determined. He was shocked when I offered him the business, but finally accepted. I knew he'd have no trouble getting the money, especially since I insisted the value be discounted heavily since I would no longer be CEO. He argued about that, but it was useless. We called our lawyers and bankers and a business appraiser who was well known and could work on short notice. After our late afternoon meeting with the lawyers and bankers adjourned, I went back to my office and found a very apologetic message from Susan. Actually, I hadn't even noticed that she hadn't called last night, something she always did when she got settled in a hotel. "Chris, I'm so sorry. I didn't call you. I ran into some colleagues and we went out to dinner, and it was late when I got back to the hotel, so I thought I'd try to catch you this morning. I hope you're having a great day. Got to run. Call me later. Bye." I was glad she hadn't said the customary "I love you" and "miss you." I expected she was in Parker's room when she made the call. I could see his smirking face as I deleted the message. I wondered how many more I'd have to deal with. I spent Monday evening on the boat making sure everything was topped off and stowing provisions. Then I went home and packed a few bags. I really didn't need much. It was after 11 when I went to bed. It would be the last night in this house. Susan hadn't called again. I wondered what excuse she'd use when, or if she called. Actually, I didn't care. I would delete any future messages. I also wondered when she'd realize I hadn't tried to call her. Probably Friday afternoon about the time she got on the plane for home. If she came home, there was a thought. Maybe she was so enamored with her sex toy she'd just stay in Atlanta for a while. I hoped he was worth it. Actually, I didn't. Parker didn't deserve Susan, even if she was an unfaithful bitch. I was loading the SUV Tuesday morning about 10 when my phone rang. I saw it was Susan and let it go to voicemail. I didn't want to hear any more lies. I finished clearing the junk from my laptop in preparation for travel. I really wouldn't need spreadsheets and marketing and income projections. I put several garbage bags in the car to drop off at the local charity. The bags contained all my business suits, a tux I hated wearing, numerous ties and belts and pairs of dress shoes, and various other things that didn't fit in my vision of my new life. I figured it'd save Susan the trouble of throwing them out, plus more room for Parker's stuff if he moved in. No, I didn't expect that to happen. Unless she was a different Susan, I expected she would tire of his bullshit in a hurry, plus the girls wouldn't stand for another man moving into their home. Of course, once the divorce was final, then she could do what she wanted. I owned the business and we never made Susan an officer of the corporation or anything else. I set it up that Jacob would make payments into a trust for the girls. The trustee was an attorney who was a golfing buddy of mine at Bateman and Thomas. They would also handle the divorce for me. There was no love lost between Bateman and Susan's firm. I thought that was appropriate. Susan would be served on Monday morning. By then I figured she'd have some inkling I was gone and was not coming back. She might fight the terms of the sale of the business, but I hoped not, since I wasn't getting any of the proceeds. Also, if necessary, Tio would provide statements from witnesses regarding Susan's stay at the Hyatt that she probably didn't want out there. He'd also mentioned he had photos of them together in various places, including a secluded corner of the hotel bar and an elevator. Nothing sexual, but certainly what a judge might consider more than friendly coworkers. People seem to forget how ubiquitous security cameras are. Disclosure of an affair with Ethan Parker would certainly jeopardize her career. I hoped we wouldn't need to resort to that. I couldn't imagine she'd contest the divorce itself, though. It seemed obvious she was trading me in for a new model. If it wasn't Parker, it would be someone else. I really didn't want much except Lady Diana, and I was leaving on her anyway. I walked through the house for the last time, thinking about how much we loved this place. There were lots of photos of Susan and me, and of the girls. I only took the one where I was on the deck of Lady Diana, arms around my girls. Susan was welcome to the rest. As I pulled away, the garden guy was just pulling up. We waved to each other. Tuesday and Wednesday were a blur of meetings with the lawyers and bankers and with the transition team. For the sake of the firm, I allowed them to hire me as a consultant for $1 a year. I knew these people around the table and had faith they would take good care of things. I had tried to train them well. Curiously, no one asked about Susan. Interestingly, Susan did call Tuesday night. Was she getting tired of Parker already? It went a voicemail and I erased it without listening to it. Wednesday noon, Jen, my assistant of 6 years, put 3 messages from Susan on my desk when I came in after being tied up with transition meetings all morning. Chris. She's sounding frantic. What's going on? I sat at my large polished wooden desk and then swiveled my chair to look at the marina nearby. We're divorcing. That was all I could choke out. She came around and hugged me from behind, leaning over the back of my office chair. I'm so sorry, Chris. Me too. She came around and sat in my lap and put her arms around my neck. I was astonished. Jen smiled. Always wanted to do this. You have a nice lap. She pulled me to her and kissed me on the lips. Damn, she could kiss. She felt my reaction. I really like this lap. Her eyes sparkled. Jen was blonde and very pretty, 30, and a divorced mother of an angel named Tammy. She had never done anything like this before, and she had always dressed appropriately. Susan was nice to her. No, she was civil. I realized right then that Susan could see Jen as a rival. There were times I spent more time with Jen than I did with Susan. Maybe Susan's woman's spidey sense saw something I didn't. I'm going to miss you, Chris. You'll love working for Jacob. He's the best. I know, but she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I feel like I'm losing my best friend. She put her head on my chest, hot tears dripping onto my polo shirt. For a second, I pictured her in a very small bikini helping to crew the Lady Diana. No, I was still married and she had Tammy to care for. Plus, it was too soon. Maybe when I got back. I hugged her, and it was my turn to kiss her this time. Maybe there was going to be life after Susan. A ray of sunshine briefly broke through the storm clouds that buffeted my soul. She pulled back. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for that. And for everything you've done for me and Tammy. Then she smiled, and for this? She walked to the door, with an exaggerated sway to her hips under a very nice cream silk skirt. Her high heels made the effect even better. At the door she turned and said in a very good Lauren Bacall voice, "Anything you need, Mr. Wallace. Just whistle. You do know how to whistle, don't you? Just pucker up and blow." I smiled at her, and she giggled as she disappeared into the outer office. It felt like the first smile I'd worn in days. The storm in the Caribbean had stalled over Cuba, but was still threatening. The weather along my route was predicted to be a bit gusty with high seas, but little else. I knew I'd been in worse. I just wanted to be gone. A 24-hour delay cost me my boat and almost cost me my life. The lawyers, bankers, and all had me in a meeting that lasted until midnight on Thursday. I went directly to the boat very tired, but with a feeling of accomplishment. It didn't take me long to get to sleep, but I was up by 4:30 making ready. The last message of several from Susan was at 11 Thursday night. I had no interest in what she had to say. I planned to drop my iPhone over the side once I crossed into the Gulf. She had left 5 messages on my phone and a couple with Megan, who had been stuck to the story that I was out on Lady Diana, and she didn't know when I'd be back. Megan stayed until the meeting adjourned, and then we walked out together. It was a beautiful warm night, perfectly clear, with a soft breeze. When we got to her Honda, she folded herself into my arms. "I'm really going to miss you, Chris." She kissed me. "I wished I started kissing you a lot sooner," she said when we came up for air. "Jen, you sure do know how to get a guy's attention." She looked at me and her eyes glistened. "Just one guy. Damn. Just when I find the right one. He has to run off. I'll be back, Jen." "I know. Just wish you didn't have to go." I held her by her shoulders as she started to cry. I hugged her, and kissed her softly, then opened her car door. See you soon, Jen. Okay, Chris. I'll be waiting. As she drove away, I stood there with very mixed emotions. I knew I cared about Megan, but for years it had been more paternal. She was sexy and smart, and was fun to be around. It would be some kind of poetic justice if I got together with Jen. The thing Susan feared. And I really didn't give a hang what anyone else thought either. Boss Mary's assistant. I laughed. I was sure getting ahead of myself. I wasn't even divorced yet, and I was walking down the aisle with Megan. I shook my head and went in my SUV. So on Friday morning, I was up and going with the dawn. Just after I cleared the waterway and was about to deep six my phone, it rang. Hi, Laura. You're up kinda early. What's up? Dad, where are you? On board Lady Diana. Just clearing the entrance to the Intercoastal. Why? I had dinner with Mom last night in Atlanta. She's a wreck. She says you're not answering her calls, and Jen has been less than cooperative about getting hold of you. True. I've been busy. I let that hang. Dad, what's going on between you and Mom? Laura, I think you know. There was a long pause. You still there? Yes. I just didn't know what to do. I love you both, but right now I hate her. I think your mother is going to need you to stay close. Dad, what have you done? I'm divorcing her. Oh no. She wailed. Laura, why didn't you tell me? I couldn't. I thought she'd have her little fling and get it out of her system, and then maybe she'd try to make it up to you, she sobbed. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. She may be in love with the guy. No. It's not like that. She only loves you. Not my idea of love, honey. Will you talk to her? Maybe when I get back, but I can't think of much to discuss. She's done the unforgivable. Dad, please don't say that. Laura, she's ripped my heart out, and it's all too soon to even think about talking to her. When will you be home? I didn't want to tell her that Venice was no longer my home. Maybe in a few months. Months? I've sold the business and I'm going sailing while I'm still young enough to do it. Oh no, that was always my dream. Although I always pictured it with your mother. She's replaced me with a younger dream. Dad, that's not true. It's only a fling. Did she tell you that? No, she said quietly. Listen, honey, a marriage is based on trust. If there's no trust, there's no marriage. How could I ever trust her again? Dad, she's so sorry. She took the first flight out this morning. I dropped her at Hartsfield just 5 minutes ago. Sorry she got caught? I don't think she realizes that you really know. Oh, I told her she needed to tell the truth, but I think she's going to try to... Actually, I don't know what she has planned. She's just determined not to lose you. Laura, honey, she's already lost me. There was silence on the other end. I'm sorry, baby. Sorry this had to happen and that you're in the middle. But Dad, can't you come home sooner? No, I need a long vacation. Will you at least hold up the divorce until you get back? Laura, what's done is done. I don't want to sound like a hard ass, but I'm not feeling very charitable toward your mother right now. I understand, but I'll be in touch. Let Rachel know, will you? Sure. Well, it's time to set the sails, so I'll say goodbye for now. I love you, Dad. I love you, Laura. See you in not too long. I hope so. Bye, Dad. My phone beeped, letting me know I had a call waiting. It was from Susan. I ignored it and turned the phone off. I had things to do, which did not include wasting time talking to my soon-to-be ex-wife. The Lady Diana is a 43-foot Northwind deck saloon cruiser. She has a beam of 14 feet and a draft of 6.5 feet. She has a raised center cockpit, and the visibility is excellent from there. She's all fiberglass construction with fiberglass masts. Her interior is teak, and she sails like a dream. Built in Spain, she costs more than most houses. Growing up on coastal Florida, I learned to sail as a kid on tiny craft that could hardly be trusted past the breakwater, but I was hooked. When I finally had some money, I bought a used sailboat. Over the years, I continued to trade up. Then 3 years ago, I found Lady Diana. It was gently used, and it was the boat I always wanted. I never regretted it. I think even Susan enjoyed the boat, at least in the beginning, but somehow, she never had, or made the time to join me on something I loved. It wasn't like the accommodations were Spartan. It had hot water showers, 2 heads, a generator that kept all the electronics going, and she was smooth in the water and easy for one person to handle with power winches and everything that made for comfortable and safe open ocean cruising. Susan was an experienced sailor, having grown up around sailboats, and she could crew the Diana alone if necessary. I thought we were the ideal crew since we were both experienced. But Susan lacked the passion I had. I was shocked one time at a social gathering when I overheard her call Diana Chris's mistress. If Diana was my mistress, then she was the only mistress I ever had, but I guess now she would be my only companion. I tried very hard to spend as much time with Susan and never denied her my company at the round of social activities she attended because they were important, but our leisure time was more and more taken up with her drive to be more successful. As I was able to put more in the hands of my subordinates, she worked more. Of course, her involvement with Ethan explained a lot. I wondered how long that had been going on and whether there had been others. That thought really stung. The sunrise behind me, blood red, reminded me of the old sailor's adage, red sky in morning, sailors take warning. I shrugged it off. The seas were relatively calm, and there was a strong wind from aft which hustled me along. The feeling was wonderful and my spirits lifted as I sailed away from land. The Diana seemed like a living thing as we raced into the Gulf. The only sounds were the wind in the rigging and the swish of the water as we moved along. I was elated and saddened at the same time. Elated to finally be free of all those responsibilities that I had begun to dread. Maybe Susan had done me a favor. Where would I have been 5 years or 10 years from now? Still at my desk, or dead from a heart attack, never having the time to do the things I had the money to do. Maybe I only needed a long vacation. I was glad to have cut my ties, but saddened to have no one to share this adventure with. For some reason, I kept my iPhone. I tucked it away in the side cargo pocket of my shorts. Maybe I felt it was my connection to Laura. I sailed all day on a track that would take me the most direct route across the Gulf of Mexico toward my destination 1,000 miles and maybe 5 or 6 days away at Corpus Christi, Texas. I was in no rush and figured I could put in there for a few days and top everything off before heading south along the east coast of Mexico. I kept my eyes on the clouds to the south and kept an ear on the weather radio. Late Friday night, I set the autopilot and stretched out under the stars. I always wore a life jacket and a tether while at sea, especially when sailing alone. After a bit of restless sleep, I went down into the cabin to the large bed. I looked at it and remembered how Susan and I had christened this boat. We had been gone for a week and made love every day and night. What happened to those people? I didn't sleep much better down below. I just couldn't turn my brain off. Susan was constantly intruding in my thoughts. I knew I had done the right thing. I couldn't stay married to a woman who betrayed me. But why had she done it? Was I so much of an inadequate husband? Maybe someday I'd finally ask her. Right now the pain was too raw to do anything but escape. A couple of times in the night, I got up to reset the sails. The winds had come up from the southeast. I awoke Saturday morning to gray skies and higher seas. I made coffee and picked up the Weather Channel on my satellite feed. I was surprised to see the storm that had been predicted to turn south and make landfall in the Yucatan was now much stronger and heading north. I was right in its path. I was exactly in the wrong spot. I was too far from Florida to turn back and not close enough to the southern U.S. to outrun it. Things were going to get rough. For the first time, I started to worry. I'd been in rough weather, but nothing like what was barreling down on us. I cursed my own stupidity for not delaying my trip or pushing harder to leave earlier. I had a good fix on my position and decided to head north for the southern coast of the U.S. Maybe I could get into one of the shipping channels and if worst came to worst, get picked up. By late Saturday night, I had to shorten sail as the winds pushed us. I knew I wasn't going to be able to outrun the storm, so I tried everything down and put on a short wetsuit and made sure I had flotation and flares and water handy. I secured the Zodiac with slip knots in case I had to make a hasty departure. The storm played havoc with communications, but I managed to get through to Galveston Coast Guard Station and give them a position report. I wasn't in distress, so I was low priority. Basically, they said, keep them apprised. I knew I was too far from the coast for them to send a helicopter. I just had to trust to Diana to get me through. For the remainder of Saturday and well into Sunday morning, it was hell as I tried to keep us ahead of the storm. I gave Galveston 2 more updates, but they were pretty busy. All day Sunday, we rode the front edge of the storm. I ate my trail mix and energy bars and drank the rest of my water. I just couldn't leave the helm long enough to get anything else as I tried to push Diana faster. I knew it was hopeless. It was just a matter of time, and the worst of the storm would be upon us. The seas were whipped into froth by the high winds, and I was constantly wet and my muscles ached from the unending battle to keep Diana on course and from being swamped by the ever larger waves. By nightfall, I knew things were getting worse as the rain bands lashed us and visibility became practically non-existent. The waves were mast height as I tried to keep control using engine power only. Up we went, and then over the crests of the giant waves. If things weren't so deadly serious, it would have been an exhilarating ride. Then I was hit by a rogue wave that smashed into the starboard side. Had I been making sail, Diana would probably just roll over. I hung on desperately and seemed to be underwater for a long time before Diana righted herself. I was badly shaken and half drowned, and for the first time I wondered if I was going to make it. I shone a spotlight on her, and discovered my communication masts and antennas were gone along with all my other communication gear and radar and GPS. I was alone with a damaged craft, and the bulk of the hurricane was still to come. I was amazed I got the 75-horse diesel to restart, but at least I had propulsion. Without it, we would have been lost in a very short time. The night was one long nightmare of being constantly cold and wet and buffeted by huge waves and high winds that threatened to drag me overboard. It seemed the cockpit was constantly awash as I hung on to the large metal wheel for dear life. Somehow Diana and I survived the night, and by divine providence, the worst of the storm hooked to the east. I surveyed the damage in the gray Monday morning light. On top of everything else, the mainmast was split and twisted, and I was taking water somewhere forward. The pumps were holding their own so far, but when I ran out of fuel, Lady Diana was going to sink. I kept a northerly course, steering by the big compass. My body felt bruised all over, and I was exhausted, and I had no idea where I was. There was no sun to even take a reading the old-fashioned way with a sextant. I still didn't dare to leave the cockpit. The seas were just too high, but the wind was backing off. I figured I had about 10 hours of fuel left, and then it would be over. Fortunately, the Zodiac was intact, so I'd take to it, but I'd wait until the last minute. It made me sad that I was going to lose Lady Diana. I was at a point where I was more concerned about my beautiful boat than I was about the fact that in a few hours I would be in a 12-foot rubber craft in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico in the aftermath of a hurricane, fighting high winds and seas. I felt like I had survived the greatest challenges already, so what's a few more hours or days in the Zodiac? I smiled ruefully as I thought about Susan getting the news if I failed to appear in a few days. Would she be relieved? Saddened? Or upset that the $10 million life insurance policy was no longer in effect because of my resignation? It was a business life insurance policy that would pay half to SSS and half to her. Now she would get exactly zero. I was determined that I would survive, if only to cause her the embarrassment of the divorce as opposed to the convenience of being a merry widow. About midday, still struggling through the high seas, through the driving rain, I spotted smoke in the east, and then a mast. There was a ship heading my way. I fired some flares, and the ship seemed to change course. Finally, I could confirm it was heading my way. My spirits lifted, and I got a surge of energy through my exhausted body. Maybe I would survive. As it got closer, I could see it was a decrepit-looking little steel-hulled freighter. It looked like something out of an Indiana Jones movie, with rust on its flanks and a tall funnel square amidships on top of an ancient-looking faded wood deckhouse. I idled the engine and thought about how I could get close enough to get me on board, without dashing the Diana to pieces against that metal hull. Soon I saw the crew on deck, and they gestured toward the Zodiac. I hated to leave Diana. I had hoped they could throw a tow rope and take me to the nearest harbor. I figured I should be grateful since there was no telling when another ship would come by, and towing Diana in her condition would have the same result as leaving her. The seas were still high, and I ran below to gather a few things. I took one last look around the cabin, then I took my passport and wallet and the cash I had on board from the safe, and put them in a waterproof bag which I attached to my belt. As I left the cabin, I noticed my gold wedding band. I took it off my finger and casually tossed it into the cabin and closed the door. It was a grim end, but somehow symbolic that my marriage and my boat should go down together. I unlashed the Zodiac and was able to get launched and get in with a great deal of difficulty. I was exhausted, and 2 days of no sleep or decent food had left me weak. I knew I should have shut down the engine and pumps and let Diana die peacefully, but even if I wasn't here, I wanted her to have a few more hours. She had given her life for my stupidity. I had started this trip with such hopes. Now 4 days later, all was gone. I was relieved as the motor started the first time on the Zodiac. The sea was running high and threatened to spill me from my little craft, but somehow, I made it into the lee of the freighter and managed to grab the rope ladder draped over the side of the ship. I caught it on my second lunge and watched my little Zodiac fall rapidly astern. It had done its job too. I hung there feeling the cold metal against my body as I watched Diana bob in the high seas. I was too weak to climb up, and all I could do was grimly hang on as I was pulled up the tall side of the ship. Soon I was sitting on the deck feeling about as miserable as I had in my life, looking at a group that would not have been out of place in a very bad spaghetti western. As I was hoisted up by the rope ladder, I saw the oily smoke from the stack increase as the ship regained speed. It felt wonderful to have a solid, albeit dirty and wet deck under my ass. I gave a quick look at the Lady Easter as I painfully pulled myself to my feet, hanging onto the rusty deck rail. She was falling rapidly astern. I had tears in my eyes as I gave a small wave to my beautiful lady. She was pretty beat up, but still looked beautiful to me. I was going to miss her. So much for my idea of sailing to get away. My rashness had resulted in disaster for my boat. I turned and started thanking my rescuers in Spanish as they crowded around. With their rain gear on and mostly bearded faces, it was hard to tell, but they looked Spanish. Suddenly I was struck on the back of the head, and I fell to the deck. I came to in a small windowless cabin with grungy white painted steel walls. I was on the bottom bunk, and there was a small bare light bulb in the overhead. The ship was vibrating and rolling with the heavy seas. Suddenly nauseous, I rolled over and spewed onto the floor. My head hurt like the devil. I rolled onto my back. It hurt to even open my eyes, and I felt feverish. The only thing I knew was that I was on a ship somewhere, in heavy seas. The thin mattress on the bunk was damp, and I was dressed only in cargo shorts. I lifted my wrist to check the time, and discovered my watch was gone. Did I even wear a watch? Seemed like a natural reaction, so I guess I did. Wonder what happened to it. I was on a ship. How'd I get here? I had no clue. I must be sick. This didn't look like an infirmary. I lay there, head pounding, trying to remember how I got here. And where was here? Exhausted, I slept again. I dreamed I was in a snowstorm naked. I was so cold my teeth were chattering. I heard voices in Spanish. I say we just toss him overboard and be done with it. No. He's sick. Plus he's donated a lot of money for his passage. The other laughed. Put a blanket on him. If he lives, we'll put him ashore at Punta Gorda. What about the authorities? I said we'd put him ashore, not march into town with a mariachi band. They both laughed. Then there was silence. The heavy blanket was scratchy on my skin, but I was warmer now. That's the way it went for who knows how long. I vaguely remember a few times being forced to swallow pills and water. I was very thirsty but couldn't keep much down. Will he live? I heard one say. Maybe not. It's in the hands of God. There's a clinic in Punta Gorda. Tonight we leave him. There were no answers to my questions. I was still on a ship and I still had no idea where I was or how I got here. Susan Wallace was in frenzy as she watched the flat Georgia countryside below the plane. She had not spoken to Chris since he had left her at the airport on Sunday, and her stomach was knotted with dread. What had happened? How had things gotten out of control? Suddenly, what she considered her little fling with Ethan Parker threatened to destroy her marriage. She kept asking herself, what did Chris know? They had been very discreet. Susan had demanded it. She couldn't jeopardize her marriage to Chris, especially over something as trivial as sex with Ethan. It wasn't like it had been going on very long, just a couple of months. They had been together exactly 6 times. Well, at least before this week. She had been bored and feeling sorry for herself, and Ethan was the perfect guy to take advantage of the situation. He was pretty, she had to admit, but after the erotism of the first couple of times, he was actually a very unimaginative lover, much given to narcissism. Plus, she was convinced he wasn't just seeing her. No, Ethan was a pretty boy who caught her at a vulnerable time, and now she was filled with regret. Actually, she had gone to Atlanta with full intent to tell him their affair was over. But unfortunately, she had succumbed to his pleas for one more time. He had met her at the hotel with flowers and champagne, and despite her best intentions, she found herself swept up in the excitement of being so wanted by this young man. She had responded again to the illicitness of it all. He even convinced her to spend the night in his room. She thought nothing of being in plain sight as the room service people brought dinner and breakfast. It was only sometime early in the morning that she realized that she had not called Chris. She made up an excuse and called him from Ethan's room. Chris didn't answer. That was common since he was so busy, so she apologized in a voicemail. She vowed to call him that night. But Monday night came with dinner and drinks with colleagues, and it was late as Ethan maneuvered himself into her room. She was happy and relaxed and thought, what the heck? Another night of sex and then it would be over. That night was particularly disappointing since Ethan came too quickly and then passed out. She hustled him out of her room the next morning and tried to call Chris, again without success. On Tuesday morning, she left another message that sounded lame even to her. It was sometime later in the day when she was listening to a particularly boring lecture on how to make more money on foreclosures that an icy chill ran through her body. She realized that Chris had not tried to call her. That had never happened before. They had never gone so much as a day without talking. His stomach ached as she sat on that hard hotel chair, wondering what had happened. At first, she feared something had happened to Chris. Had there been an accident? Was he in the hospital unconscious after wrecking that ghastly bike of his? The thought of Chris hurt or dead made her flinch, and the thought of losing him made her nauseous. He was the only man she ever loved. He was her rock, her strength, her tender lover. Why hadn't he called? And then her blood ran cold. Could he know? She thought that was impossible. They had taken great pains to keep their secret. Had Ethan bragged to someone? That was always a possibility, but he had a lot to lose too. No, he couldn't know. Chris was just busy. As soon as they had their next break, she called Chris. No luck. Then she called his direct office line and got voicemail. She even tried that perky little assistant of his, Megan. Voicemail again. She cringed just hearing her voice. Susan had to admit that she was insecure about Megan. Although Chris never gave any indication that he had the slightest interest in her, Susan had seen how Megan adored him. Susan almost laughed. Here she was, the unfaithful one, trying to attribute the same behavior to Chris. She knew he was as faithful as an old hound dog, although he was far from old or a hound dog. Sunday night she had tried to make up to him for those weeks, or perhaps months, when he took him for granted, took his love for granted. Why wasn't his wonderful love and loving enough? He was certainly a more skillful and patient lover than Ethan, or any man she had slept with before marriage. She shook her head. Why had she got involved with Ethan in the first place? The fun of illicit sex, and the sneaking around, and the thrill of having a secret was ashes when compared to her marriage to Chris. So, was that it? Was she so secure in his love that she felt like she could have this little fling? That was ridiculous. Maybe she was just a selfish, inconsiderate bitch who put her marriage in jeopardy for what? A few hours of pleasure with Ethan Parker? And there was damn little pleasure for the most part. Chris knew every inch of her and every erogenous zone. She never enjoyed sex with Ethan the way she did with Chris. What a fool she was. When Ethan left that morning, she told him that they were through and not to come near her again. He had only grinned at her like he was God's gift to women, but she knew it was over. There was too much at stake, and she knew now that there was no one for her but Chris. She just hoped it wasn't too late to repair the mess she made. But first she needed to talk to him. Where was Chris, and why hadn't he tried to call? She spent Tuesday night alone, and it was a restless night. She woke from a terrible nightmare that Chris had disappeared. She felt so alone and afraid. There was no answer at home or on his cell phone. Susan was increasingly filled with dread. She was almost afraid to go home early. How would she explain that? Was he even there? On Wednesday, she walked around like a zombie, her mind racing with plans to try to repair things. She finally got through to Megan and was told Chris was out on the Diana. Somehow that didn't make her feel better. Chris rarely took the boat out on weekdays. And no, Megan didn't know when he'd be back. That was infuriating. She wanted to scream at her and demand she find Chris and have him call her. Chris didn't call Wednesday night, but Ethan made it obvious that he wanted to get together again when she saw him after dinner. Ethan, it was a big mistake on my part, and we're through. He scowled at her. Just don't come crawling to me when you've got an itch that hubby can't scratch. She felt sick. How could she have ever been attracted to this jerk? He was disgusting. After another sleepless night and more messages to Chris, Thursday morning she had pretty much decided to catch the next flight home. But she dithered until afternoon, fearful of what she would have to face at home. Then Laura called her and asked her to dinner. How come you didn't let me know you'd be in town? I had to find out from Dad. Sorry, dear. I've just been incredibly busy, and you know these conferences, always smoozing with potential clients. Work, work, work. She tried to laugh. It sounded feeble. She tried not to sound desperate when she said, So when did you hear from your dad? Last Sunday. I talked to him. Called to see when you were coming up this way. I really expected to hear from you sooner. Were you even going to call me while you were in Atlanta? She tried to say it with humor, but to Susan it was an accusation. Sorry, Laura. So, dinner tonight, Mom. Unless you're too busy? She was torn. She wanted to get on a plane and go. The uncertainty was killing her, but what excuse could she give Laura? Too busy? Did Laura know something? Susan's life seemed to be spiraling out of control. Sure. So, Mom, what's with you and Dad? They were in a quiet restaurant not far from the hotel when Laura dropped that bomb on Susan. Susan could feel herself flush. What do you mean? Are you not happy with him anymore? Has he done something? What are you talking about? Has your father said something? No, he hasn't. But remember, I was around all summer. Something's not right with you too. That's absurd. Is it? Her daughter's questions were making her uncomfortable. Why would you say such a thing? Does the name Ethan Parker ring any bells? This time Susan's blood ran cold. What about Ethan Parker? He's a member of my firm. He's here, isn't he? In Atlanta at this conference, isn't he? Susan took a large sip of her wine, stalling for time. This conversation was getting dangerous. She put on an indignant look. Yes, he is. What are you implying? Mother, I know about you and Ethan. She didn't elaborate. Her comment just hung in the air between them. An evil accusation. This was a nightmare. If Laura knew, did that mean? She couldn't complete the thought. That's absurd. She tried to brazen it out. How could you think such a thing? Laura looked at her with sadness in her eyes. How about Ethan calling the house and telling you how he couldn't wait to have sex with you again? Susan thought she'd faint. She told Ethan never to call and could only remember one time he did. Laura must have heard him on an extension. Suddenly, Susan couldn't hold back the tears any longer. I'm so sorry, Laura, for yourself and what you might lose. She jerked her head up. Does your father know? Do you mean have I told him? No, I haven't. Not because of you, but because I love him and so desperately want to keep him from being hurt. Do you think he knows? She blurted out. Do you care? That hurt her deeply and she wanted to lash out at her daughter, but it made her realize that her protestations of love for Chris would sound awfully hollow. I'm sorry, Laura. I was stupid. I thought I'd have a little fling. Something your father would never know about. Just some excitement. It sounded lame. Is there something wrong with Dad? Doesn't he keep you satisfied? Oh God, yes. He's the most wonderful lover. Her mind flashed to the previous Saturday night when he brought her to such heights of ecstasy. How could she do this to Chris? Then why? I'm getting old and I wanted something. Maybe recapture my youth. I don't know. I thought no one would ever find out. The tears flowed. Is it over? Yes. I just want to get back with your dad and spend my life making it up to him. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Susan ordered another glass of wine. Laura, I don't know where he is. What? I keep leaving messages and he hasn't called me all week. I'm so afraid. Megan says he's on the Diana. Why won't he call me? Laura looked sad. Mother, that's not like Dad. Unless he knows. Oh no. She buried her face in her hands as she sobbed. You need to go home now. Yes, I know, but I'm so afraid. She paused, looking at her daughter with red-rimmed eyes. I'll get the first flight in the morning. Good. I'll take you to the airport. She took her mother's hand. Dad loves you a lot. Susan nodded, tears flowing. I think you can get through this. Susan managed a slight smile. I can't believe how stupid I've been. I hope it's not too late. What should I do? I can't tell you that. If Dad loves you as much as I think he does, he'll forgive you. But how can I tell him? I don't know. But I think you have to. If he doesn't know, then you need to find out what's wrong. I'm so afraid I'll lose him. I couldn't bear it. She sobbed. Susan felt devastated. For the first time, she realized how precarious her marriage was. Laura was optimistic, but Susan knew Chris. Could he forgive her? Could they ever find their way back? Susan didn't know. Now she was on an airplane consumed with guilt. She called him one last time shortly after Laura dropped her off at the airport, leaving a message that she was coming home early and that she hoped he'd be there at the airport. She didn't know what to do. She was convinced he would never forgive her, and she would spend the rest of her life without the man she loved so desperately. How could she have been so stupid? She vacillated between trying to bluff it out and deny everything, and flinging herself at his feet, begging for forgiveness. The worst part was not knowing. Why wouldn't Chris talk to her? She knew that he was raised by his maternal grandparents after his parents died in a plane crash, and the rule of that house was to avoid confrontation. Chris had taken that to heart. He only half-jokingly said, "Don't get mad. Get even." She knew in his business dealings he forged partnerships and coalitions, and confrontation was avoided at all costs. This strategy worked. That was what made her so afraid that he knew. Rather than confront her, he would take a different tack, and she would be blindsided. God, she ached inside. She watched as the plane approached the St. Petersburg airport. The early morning sun gleamed on the blue water of the Gulf and reflected from the sails of a number of boats far below. She wondered if the Lady Diana was among them. Susan was disappointed, but not surprised that Chris wasn't at the airport. Actually, she felt somewhat relieved since it put off the meeting she was dreading. She tapped her foot impatiently as she waited for her bag. She still hadn't decided what to do, and unfortunately, she had no one to talk to about what to do. Laura had already weighed in, and she couldn't talk to Rachel. Hard problems were those she talked to Chris about. His wise counsel had helped her through many, but this was one she couldn't imagine talking to Chris about. How could she admit to him her betrayal? Her mind was a whirl, and she kept reproaching herself for her stupidity. Why had she been so blind and stupid? To Ethan, she was just another conquest. He would probably go through life breaking up marriages. She was furious at how easily he had manipulated her, but she knew, ultimately, the fault was hers. How could she have been so blind? How could she make this up to Chris? It drove her crazy that she didn't know. He wouldn't communicate with her. She really didn't know what to do. Soon she had her bag and grabbed a taxi home. Her stomach knotted as it came around the corner, and she saw the house. Was he there? She had left a message, so he knew she was coming home. Was he in the house waiting for her? Or was he still out in the Gulf somewhere on Lady Diana, thinking about what to do about her? Them? Her legs seemed leaden as she approached the door. The house was empty. She breathed out, realizing she had been holding her breath. As usual, everything was immaculate. The house cleaner kept the place spotless with her weekly visits. Although today the place seemed especially empty. She took her bag into the master bedroom. She kicked off her heels and looked around. Nothing seemed amiss, but that was the problem. Even when the cleaner had been there were always telltale signs of habitation when Chris was home. A cup in the sink, tissues in the wastebaskets, maybe a wet towel hanging in the bathroom. Nothing. The house could have been a display model. She walked into Chris's bathroom off the master. Nothing. His toiletries were gone. Her stomach clenched. She turned and quickly went to his walk-in closet. She sagged against the wall as she looked upon the empty spaces where his clothes used to hang. Susan walked through the rest of the house in a fog, tears rolling unheeded down her cheeks. There was no sign of Chris. Yes, he knows, she sobbed. She sat down on the large sofa in the living room and slowly looked around. Was this to be her life? This heartache of loneliness without her lover, her husband, her life in this big house? She lay on the cushions, legs drawn up as she sobbed. After a while, she decided that she would find Chris. She would beg him to forgive her, to love her again, to hold her and tell her it would be all right. She retraced her steps into the bedroom and changed out of her business suit and into jeans, cream silk blouse and Nikes. She pulled her auburn hair back into a ponytail and did the best she could repairing her makeup. Then she pulled her Mercedes convertible out of the garage, and hiding her puffy eyes behind a pair of aviator sunglasses, she headed for Chris's office. Megan was packing the items from Chris's desk and brushing away tears as she did so when she noticed Susan standing in the doorway. She had no idea how long she'd been there. Susan stepped into the office and took off her sunglasses. It was clear to Megan that she too had been crying. In fact, Megan couldn't recall a time when she had seen Susan dressed in anything as casual as jeans. With her hair pulled back, she could have passed for someone 10 years younger. Susan's eyes widened in surprise as she looked around Chris's office. Her first question was going to be, "Where's Chris?" But between her brain and mouth it became, "What's going on?" Megan straightened up from taping up a box on Chris's large wooden desk. "Guess you didn't get the memo. Chris decided to sell the company to Jacob Whitaker and some investors, and he's taken the Lady Diana to explore the 7 seas. She said it with a great deal of bitterness in her voice. Susan was taken aback. What on earth would prompt Chris to do such a thing? Then she flushed, knowing the answer to her own question. Wanting to fight back, she said in a condescending voice, "Well, I see he didn't take you along." Megan looked at her, anger and sorrow on her face. "That's right. Always the faithful husband. Even though I would have jumped at the chance. But I see he didn't take his faithful wife along either." She had emphasized faithful. Susan winced. What had he told Megan? Susan decided she had better tone it down if she was going to get any information from Megan. "I just need to know where he is. I really don't know. He just said he was going sailing and not to expect him back soon." Susan watched a tear streak Megan's cheek. Quietly, she said, "Do you know when he left?" Megan looked at her, maybe to ask her why she cared at all. "He said he wanted to be gone before sunrise this morning." "Today?" Megan nodded. "Maybe the dockmaster at the marina will know." Susan started to turn. "Susan, I don't know what you did to Chris, but I suspect I know." Susan didn't have anything to say. "But let me tell you, you hurt him very much whatever you did. He didn't deserve it. He's the nicest, kindest man I've ever met. And yes, I'm in love with him. And no, he never knew. He never tried to take advantage of me or my situation when I needed help." Susan turned and walked out the door, her new tears now hidden by the sunglasses. As she left, she heard, "And when he comes back, I intend to fight you for him, and I'm going to win." Shaken, Susan sat in her car, head against the seat back, trying to come to grips with what she just heard. Chris sold the company? He had spent his life building it up. It was his life. How could he do that? Had she hurt him that badly? Yes. She shook her head, trying to deny the fact that all of this was the fault of her stupidity. And Megan's parting words were like knife in her heart. Chris was a tall, handsome, successful man, and no doubt he would have women, younger women, flocking around. She'd seen the way her daughter's girlfriends looked at him, and even some of her friends. She had been so caught up in her own career and fears of growing old she had forgotten about her man. The man she shared 23 years with. 23 years. That had to be worth something. Certainly Chris had to be made to see that her fling wouldn't justify throwing it all away. Her thoughts gave her scant comfort. Chris was gone and she didn't know where. Susan drove to the marina and parked outside the office. She walked up the stairs to an area that almost looked like an airport control tower. It was filled with charts and communications equipment. There were 2 young men and an older man sitting on stools. One of the younger men was speaking into the microphone of a cordless headset. The older man looked her over. "Can I help you?" He smiled. "I'm Susan Wallace. My husband Chris took his boat out early this morning. Did he by chance tell you where he was heading?" The man tried to hide his surprise that a wife didn't know where her husband was going. He'd been married a couple of times, so he also knew that sometimes things were rocky in a marriage. This appeared to be one of them. He liked Chris. He was one of the good guys around the marina, always lending a hand and not just a fair-weather sailor like so many others. "Chris?" "Sure. Chris never goes out without checking in here. By the way, I'm Mark Harris. I've known Chris," he rubbed his chin. "Oh, I guess 10 years. He turned to a computer. "I'm pretty sure he said Corpus Christi, but let me check." He typed in Lady Diana. "Here it is. Yup, straight across the Gulf to Corpus Christi. Should be there in 5 or 6 days, could be sooner." Did he say where he planned to go after Corpus Christi? Mark could see how uncomfortable she was. Chris was lucky to have such a beautiful wife. He wondered what was wrong. He shook his head. "Thank you, Mark. He's only been gone a few hours. Would you like me to try to contact him?" He indicated the communications equipment. "I'm sure he's up and monitoring." "No, thank you. Maybe I'll surprise him." She said it quietly as if to herself. Mark watched her leave, enjoying the view of the back of her tight jeans. "What was that all about?" asked one of the others. "Don't know, but I hope for Chris's sake he doesn't have one of those cute young things in the Slurpee suits I've seen him with on the Diana. For his sake." They laughed. Susan drove into the parking lot next to the marina and walked out to the slip where Chris had the Diana berthed. Of course there was no Diana. She sat on a small bench at the end of the dock and watched the boat traffic, feeling the warm rays of the autumn sun. Chris's dream was to take the Diana and just sail. She should be with him. She had thrown away that future. Now he was out there alone, and she was here alone. They belonged together. She took her phone from her bag and called her assistant. "Clarice, I need a ticket to Corpus Christi." Clarice was used to Susan's brusque manner. "When?" "Oh, I think Monday." "I'll check. When do you want me to call you?" "I'll hold." After about 2 minutes, Clarice came back. "Okay. Monday noon American Eagle from St. Pete to Atlanta, then American to Dallas, then American Eagle to Corpus Christi. Puts you in kinda late though." "That's okay. I'll email the itinerary and your car and hotel information as soon as I confirm those." "Thanks." "Oh, Ms. Wallace, will you be in today?" "No, I'll be at home." "Anything important?" "There are about half a dozen things that need your signature." "I can drop then by?" "That would be best." "In about an hour?" "Yes, see you then." Susan sat and watched the boats and water for a little longer. Now she knew where Chris would be, and she intended to be there when he pulled in. She would force him to talk to her. She was determined to win him back, regardless of what it took. That weekend was terrible for Susan. She spent several hours in her office trying to blot out her misery. The sunny Florida skies belied her emotional turmoil. When she was home, she mostly paced. She couldn't sleep more than a few minutes at a time, and she jumped every time the phone rang. It was never Chris, though. She couldn't eat, and she kept herself inside, feeling wretched. She didn't watch television, so she had no knowledge of the huge storm in the Gulf. The edge of the storm started ashore in Venice late Sunday night, and by Monday morning the airport was closed. "What do you mean the airport is closed?" She yelled in frustration into her cell phone. "I have to get to Corpus Christi today." "I'm sorry, Ms. Wallace," said the hairy travel agent. "I can try to get you on the flights tomorrow, but the forecast isn't promising." "How about a charter?" "The storm has closed every airport in Florida. Nobody is flying." "I'm sorry." Susan ground her teeth in frustration as she paced her living room. "Okay, just get me reservations out of here as soon as the airport reopens." Goddamned storm. She looked out over her backyard and watched the waves on her pool and the litter all over the yard left by her palms. Rain thudded against the roof. The storm had been downgraded to a tropical storm, and there was no evacuation, but she was stuck. She had toyed with taking Chris's SUV and trying to drive to Atlanta, but thought better of it. Many of the roads were closed. The weather was killing her marriage. She had to get to Corpus Christi. She had to see Chris. How long would he stay there? The house phone rang. "Hello, Mrs. Wallace?" "Yes." "Are you the wife of Chris Wallace?" "Yes." Her stomach nodded. "This is Petty Office Barnes from Coast Guard Station Galveston." He sounded very young. "Yes," she said quietly. It dawned on her that the storm that was battering Venice might have caught Chris. Suddenly she felt chilled. "We were wondering if you have heard from your husband?" Susan felt lightheaded and sat on a nearby chair. "No, I haven't. We were in communication with your husband on board. He seemed to be looking for something." "Lady Diana." Is that his boat? Yes. And he gave us his coordinates, and he was in the path of the storm. Susan was glad she was sitting. The thought of Chris out in the Gulf in this storm made her feel sick. When was that? He paused, and she heard typing on a keyboard. Saturday. Saturday, she repeated, her head bent forward over her knees to keep from fainting. What's being done to find him? Well, ma'am, we didn't receive a distress call, so first we have to check to see if he checked in somewhere. Oh, she said softly, her insides churning. Ma'am, this happens all the time. People get into port, and sometimes their radio equipment has malfunctioned or been damaged, and they don't follow up with us. But you had his coordinates. Could he have made it to port? There was a pause. He was pretty far from the coast. The young petty officer admitted. What happens now? Well, we've got a couple of planes up. They'll be looking for anyone out there. She hardly noticed as the tears filled her eyes. Is there anything I can do? No, ma'am. Just please let us know if he contacts you. He gave her the number. Susan slumped to the floor and sobbed. She didn't know how long she lay there when she heard her doorbell above the sound of the wind and the rain. She pulled herself up and went to the door. Who would be out in this? She opened the door and saw a large, florid-faced man wearing a slicker and looking very damp on her doorstep. He looked vaguely familiar. Are you Susan Wallace? Yes. I've got a package for you. He held up a thick manila envelope. She opened the storm door just a bit and reached for it. He put it in her hand. Mrs. Wallace, you've been served. He turned and walked down the rain-swept walk toward the street. Somehow Susan found herself sitting on the cold flagstone of the entryway, leaning against the wall. She sobbed as she held the envelope with shaking hands. I lay in my bed and watched a gecko make slow progress across the cracked whitewashed ceiling. A decrepit ceiling fan tried unsuccessfully to move the warm air around. My head hurt like the devil, and I was very thirsty. There was someone else in the room. I knew it was a she since she smelled so good. I turned my head to see her and asked for some water. She was a pretty young woman who looked to be part Spanish and part South American Indian, dressed in a set of faded green scrubs. I moaned from the pain as I turned my head, and the sound startled her. She came over to the bed with a wide-eyed look. Was I that ugly looking? Then she smiled, and I felt her cool fingers on my arm. Good morning. I am glad you are awake. I'll let the doctor know. She said it in Spanish. I croaked. Agua, por favor. She patted my arm. After I get the doctor. She had a sweet smile. I listened to her footsteps retreat down the hall. Wonder what this place is. A small hospital or clinic maybe. But where? South America? Mexico? I gingerly looked around the small room, trying not to move my head. There was a crucifix on the wall opposite the bed, and nothing more on the walls. To my left was a large open window, which looked out over an expanse of azure sea. I guessed I was on the second floor. There were a number of boats, large and small, anchored about 100 yards out. The most spectacular was a two-masted schooner. It was painted white and looked beautifully maintained. It had the classic look of schooners built 100 years ago. I'm sick. At least there's something wrong with my head. I reached up and touched bandages. What happened? Guess the doctor can tell me. So how'd I get here? Maybe I live here. I know Spanish, but I'm thinking in English, so I guess I'm not originally from around here. At that point, a dramatically beautiful woman came in with the woman in the scrubs. She was maybe mid-30s, tall, slim with shoulder-length dark hair. She was wearing a faded yellow polo shirt and khaki pants. She had a dancer's lithe look and very nice body. She said in Spanish, I'm Dr. Delgado, and I'm very glad you're back with us. Her smile was genuine and warm, but it was her eyes that hypnotized me. They were green with flecks of gold. I replied in Spanish, I'm happy to meet you, doctor. I looked at her. She could read the consternation as I tried to remember my name. I don't know my name. I looked at her, trying desperately to remember anything about who I was or where I was from, anything about my life. You've sustained a head injury. Don't worry, it will come back. This she said in English. But please don't worry. Head trauma-induced amnesia is not uncommon, but it does happen. In time, your memory will come back. Thank you. It's frustrating not to remember anything, including who I am. Yes, but some people might welcome a clean slate. She smiled. I hope I'm not one of them. She laughed. It was a nice laugh. So, where am I? And how did I get here? You're in a small town in Belize called Punta Gorda, and a local fisherman found you lying on the pier in the early morning 2 days ago. 2 days ago. I said it half to myself. I would have shaken my head had it not hurt so much to move it. Yes. You said I had some kind of head trauma? Yes. You suffered a blow to the back of the head with some kind of blunt object. You also have an injury to the front of your head. Apparently where you fell after being struck. And I'm not from here? No, nor is there any record that you ever entered Belize legally. She let that comment hang. Was I some kind of criminal? Did she think I was? I hope not. For some reason, I didn't want to be a bad guy. I didn't want Dr. Delgado to think poorly of me. My head is bandaged. Yes, you required surgery. Here? Her green eyes flared just a bit. Yes, downstairs we have a small operating theater. First time I ever did skull surgery there, though. I could tell from her look of concentration that she was thinking about my surgery, and it had been a difficult thing. So how am I doing? Do you feel up to some tests? Could I have some water first, please? She turned to her assistant and nodded. Her fingers were so cool and wonderful on my wrist as she took my pulse. I was disappointed when she let go. The blood pressure cuff came next. She scribbled in the chart. My water arrived, and I sipped it greedily through the straw. That's better. Thank you. I smiled at her. The nurse used the crank at the foot of the bed to move the head of the bed up a bit, and then pulled the sheet from my torso. She also pulled it up off my legs. In the end, it was pretty much bunched across my midsection. So for the next few minutes, Dr. Delgado tested reflexes and poked and prodded me. Her smell was intoxicating. Maybe jasmine? I loved smelling her as she moved me around and leaned very close. I started to get hard, and I was glad I had a sheet over my nakedness. Well, at least that still works, I thought with some amusement. Finally, she sat back on the metal stool near the bed. She quickly glanced away from the tint in the bunched-up sheet as I was trying to adjust myself so I was not so obvious. I caught a twinkle of amusement in her eyes as she said, "Well, your physical state seems to be unimpaired. You seem to be in excellent physical shape. There are a number of bruises on your body that may or may not have anything to do with whatever happened to you." She indicated some pretty nasty bruises on my legs and forearms and shoulders. So I pretty much look like I've been rode hard and put up wet? I laughed. It hurt to laugh, but it felt good to be alive. She looked puzzled for a second before understanding the colloquialism. She smiled. Indeed. Now I'm going to take off the bandages. I watched her as she stood over me, unwinding the dressing on my head. She then moved to each side. Very good. I felt the breeze on my now bald head. I like the sound of that. You're a very lucky man. Oh? Your injuries caused your brain to swell, and there was blood seeping into the cranial cavity which put more pressure on your brain. My guess is that another day, and you would have been dead. Oh, head trauma can cause a host of other problems, but the severity of well, from the look of you when brought in, I'd say it was at least 2 days, maybe more since you were struck. And the surgery? I grimaced as she described drilling holes in my head, plus giving me large doses of progesterone which showed promise in clinical trials in limiting damage from head trauma. Thank you, doctor, for saving my life. You're welcome. Just wait until you get my bill. She laughed. I'm sure it will be my pleasure to pay it, as soon as I figure out who I am and if I have any money. If not, then I'll have to be your indentured servant. I kind of like that idea, although I wonder how I'd explain that to the IRS. It would be our secret. Right. A tall, handsome man who was my constant companion, catering to my every whim. Now how would that look? Well, to me, like the man was very lucky. She gave me one of those women's inscrutable looks, so I changed the subject. Is this your clinic? Yes, but you're lucky there too. I'm not here all the time. I just arrived the night before you were brought in. Oh, I seem to be saying that a lot. I travel from Belize City by boat, and we stop at clinics like this along the coast, usually for about 2 weeks at a time. I then use it as a base to treat patients in the towns and villages in the surrounding areas. Normally, this clinic is only staffed by Nurse Alvarez and a helper. Can I buy a lottery ticket somewhere close by? I liked hearing her laugh. I yawned. Sorry. So when do you think my memory will come back? She frowned. On her, even a frown was beautiful. I don't know. I have some experience in this area, but with each patient it's different. With some it all comes back at once. With others it comes back in pieces. It's like a mosaic, and the pieces start falling into place as the brain repairs itself. Some people never regain all their memories. For example, you might not remember how you were injured or by whom. Although I have to say, from the trauma, whoever did it wanted you dead. And maybe when they dumped you on our dock, they thought you were pretty much gone. I don't understand why you were left there. There's a lot of water around where you could have been dumped. Plus, this is one of the few towns with a permanent clinic. Puzzling. A falling out among thieves, and then a change of heart? She gave me a long look. Perhaps. I yawned again. I'm going to let you sleep for a while. Can you give me something for this headache? Sorry. I wish I could. But you've been in a coma, and with the internal bleeding, even aspirin is too dangerous right now. Okay, but I'm blaming you for the pain because you drilled holes in my head. You know that might have to count against my time of servitude. She smiled. Please try to sleep. The headaches will go away soon. I'm going to leave the dressings off and just have you wear a gauze cap for now. Okay, you're the doctor. I closed my eyes and slept. My dreams were filled with jumbled images. I was on a boat fighting heavy seas, and then a beautiful auburn-haired woman joined me in the cockpit. We were in a storm. She looked very sad. Her hair was blowing across her face. I was angry with her. She kept trying to say something, but I couldn't hear her because of the sounds of the storm. I awoke. It was dark and Dr. Delgado was slumped in a rattan chair near my bed, head back against a white pillow. The only light came from the hallway. She was beautiful, but she looked exhausted. I wondered why she was in my room. I figured I was sicker than she let on. Did she think I was here doing something illegal? Of course I was in Belize illegally. There was no record I had entered the country. That meant I probably came by boat. But what boat? From where? I knew somehow that Belize was a small country, sparsely populated with very little crime. But of course, being bordered by Guatemala and Honduras, there was lots of opportunities for mischief nearby. Had there been a falling out among thieves? Was I a drug smuggler or gun runner? I searched my memory. Nothing. But I didn't feel like I was. But how to explain my turning up here with an injury that certainly was intended to kill me? I decided I must have been the victim of a crime, and not some criminal having a falling out with his compatriots. Robbery? Was the woman from my dream looking for me? I would need to get in touch with the American embassy to see if I could have them help me. Of course, what if I was Canadian? I didn't sound like a Brit. I figured I was American, especially after the rode hard and put up wet comment. The pain in my head had subsided a bit. It seemed to be more localized on the outside. My guess, the pain was around where the drilling was done. The thought of anyone drilling into my head was unsettling. Sure glad I'm not a doctor. Well, I guess I just figured out I wasn't a doctor. I watched the lights of the boats in the bay, trying to identify the type by the outlines in the lights. I was so automatic that I didn't think about it until I was estimating the tonnage on the sloop. One thing I do know about is boats. So where's my boat? I looked at Dr. Delgado. She was watching me. I'm worse than you let on? Yes. Head trauma is tough. I would still describe your condition as critical. I am feeling better though. The inside headache seems to have lessened, and it's these dang holes that are causing me trouble. That's progress. Now go back to sleep. She got up from the chair and stretched, her arms over her head as she yawned, giving me the wonderful sight of her curves pushed hard against the front of her thin polo shirt as she was silhouetted against the light from the hall. She caught me staring and seemed to flush. She came over and took my pulse with those same cool fingers, touched my forehead, then said, "Well, Mr. Nemo, you seem pretty tough. Everything seems to be getting back to normal." I was glad she couldn't see, or ignored my arousal. When was the last time I got laid anyway? Nemo? As in the Jules Verne character in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea? No, more like the classic Latin use. It literally means no one, but I believe was also used to designate an unknown person or unidentified person. Jules Verne's Captain Nemo took that name to hide his identity. He was no one. I like Captain Nemo better than just no one. And from my observations of the harbor, I think I'm a sailor. Oh? I'll bet in the daylight I can identify every kind of craft in the bay. We'll try that. A sailor would explain a lot, although you don't fit the image. Plus, where are your tattoos? We laughed. This time I had less pain. Now go to sleep. I closed my eyes and smelled the smell of her. When I woke in the morning, only Nurse Alvarez was there. She said the doctor was delivering a baby in the next town. That afternoon I was feeling much better. I was embarrassed when Nurse Alvarez had to help me to the bathroom and stand by while I pissed. But it was progress. A lunch meal of wonderful fresh fish and rice was delivered from a local restaurant. I ate it all. My stomach grumbled a little, but otherwise no problems. Teresa, I found out that was Dr. Delgado's first name, started me on aspirin for the soreness of the wounds, but refrained from anything stronger. Over the next couple of days, she got me out of bed more and more. She insisted I hold on to her or Nurse Alvarez as we paced the small room, making sure of my equilibrium. I was happy to do it. I even got to shave and shower, but under the eyes of Alvarez. I found out her name was Maria, and she was originally from Guatemala. She had a husband who helped out around the clinic and did other jobs in town, but she sure didn't keep her eyes to herself as she assisted me in and out of the shower. Over the next few days, Teresa x-rayed my head a couple of times and said she thought I was making remarkable progress. She also gave me a battery of tests to check on my mental acuity. I surprised myself when discovered I knew lots of things about the world and history and literature and even art and theater. I knew about the US and little about Canada, so we figured me for an American. And you speak what passes for Spanish. she said, with a smile in her voice. So I know all this useless junk, but nothing about me. How come? We were sitting on a couple of woven chairs in the shade of the wide porch which ran the length of the building. It was late afternoon and my first foray outside the whitewashed walls of the clinic. She had finished with her rounds and clinic duties, and we relaxed with some mango-sweetened lemonade Maria had prepared. The brain is funny in how it retains memory. Of course, we have established that you are an educated man who has a variety of interests. So much for the common sailor idea. She laughed. A couple of days later, I was sitting on the porch facing the bay and watching the sun come up when Teresa returned from her run. My cargo shorts had been resurrected and the town shops had provided some cotton shirts and a new pair of running shoes. Teresa was wearing nylon shorts, a tank top, and Nikes, and with her hair pulled back, she looked very young. Her slim body was amazing. I knew she ran each morning a few miles, and when she returned to the clinic, she walked about 10 minutes to cool off. May I join you? I got to my feet and walked unaided, except for hanging onto the porch rail, to the foot of the steps. She looked at me. Okay, but I don't know if you'll want to hang on to me. I probably smell like one of your road-hard horses. I felt steady enough on my feet to walk alone beside her, but I wasn't going to pass up an opportunity to touch her. Anyway, it was doctor's orders. So I took her sweaty arm and we walked. It was wonderful. I have no idea what we talked about. It felt great to be outside and strolling with this beautiful woman. So that set the schedule for the rest of the time we were in Punta Gorda, if she was in town. Sometimes she would take Maria Alvarez and her husband as driver and go out to the more remote villages. Mostly they would be back by nightfall. I was happy that she felt my progress was going well enough to leave me unsupervised during the day. I spent my days exploring the small town and getting to know the people and just thinking. Maybe it was more about trying to make sense of what happened to me. Why couldn't I remember? Since Belize was a former British colony, most people spoke English. Punta Gorda was a sleepy little town, although a fair number of sport fishermen from the States would come through. With some of them I would spend an hour or two sampling the local beer. I'm sure Teresa would not have approved, but I had begun to feel fine. My new companion seemed fascinated by my story, and everyone asked, "What now?" I didn't have an answer, but as the days went by there was a growing feeling in my heart that I never wanted to leave Teresa. Soon she and I started an evening stroll. We became a common sight, and people greeted us warmly. And then it was Teresa who was taking my arm as we strolled, especially in the warm evening twilight as we walked on the sparsely traveled road along the shore. My memory was stubbornly resistant to being reclaimed, but I came to accept it. Sometimes when I tried hard, I came up against a cloud of anger and dark emotions that I didn't want to probe. My thoughts turned more and more to embracing the future and forgetting about a past I couldn't remember anyway. So I became content with the status quo. On our walks, I did find out about Teresa. She was a second-generation Cuban-American who grew up just outside Miami. Her grandfather, a physician, fled Castro. The family got out with just the clothes on their backs, but they persevered and prospered. Teresa's father was a professor of physics and mathematics. She had gone to medical school in Seattle, primarily to get as far from my parents as possible. She avoided any details about her short-lived marriage to a fellow resident at UC Medical Center. I took a surgical residency and lived in San Diego for 5 years. Fortunately for you, I treated a lot of head trauma. I smiled at her. Yes, fortunately for me. We talked about all manner of things, just two people who enjoyed each other's company. At the end of the day, we were like lots of couples. We talked about our day. She had an incredible passion for medicine, and she shared the small daily victories she had over death, injury, and disease. I watched her with the children of the town. She was wonderful. The people of Punta Gorda loved her. One day, as we finished children's inoculations at the clinic, she blurted, "I want a house full." Suddenly I knew I did too with her. I was falling in love with my doctor. I didn't know how old I was, but I was older, and of course there were the small problems of lack of memory, lack of any marketable skills, or any money to support a family. I did think she liked me, but did she care about me more than as a patient and new friend? Right now the status quo was just fine. So, I tried to become indispensable around the clinic. I missed her the days she was gone. Unfortunately, she decided traveling rutted roads into the countryside would not sit well with my injuries. One day as we walked, she said, "I do need to take you to the hospital in Belize City for an MRI though. This equipment doesn't really show me if there is anything bad going on in your head, like clots. Plus, I need to get back. I've been gone a month, and it's usually only 2 weeks." It warmed me knowing the reason for her delay was me. I hoped her delay was something more than that I was just a seriously ill patient. "Okay, how do we get there?" She pointed to the beautiful schooner anchored in the bay. It had reappeared the day before after being gone most of the time I was at the clinic. On the Dulcinea. That belongs to you? I wish it did. Sometimes I'd like to take her and just sail away. She looked a little sad as she gazed at the beautiful white-hulled ship in the bright blue water. It was donated by a wealthy family in San Diego to the organization that supports me, Doctors International, Central America. She smiled as she looked at me. So Captain Nemo, she challenged, tell me about her. I already knew the answer, since I'd seen her before. Sure, she's a classic steel-hulled schooner from a year 1900 design, I'd say. About 100 feet long, 80 or so tons, powered by sail or a Cummins 300-horse diesel. Crew, maybe 5, and probably built in about 2000. She laughed. How do you do that? Don't know. Want to go aboard? Absolutely. So we went out to her, picked up by the ship's Zodiac, crewed by a very dark-skinned Jamaican named Pete. As I got in the Zodiac, my memory tried to seize on a bit of something. I must have frowned. You okay? She asked. I nodded as I looked around in the small craft. I knew I'd been in one before, and it may have been recent. Just a bit of memory going ka-thunk. I was introduced to Captain Jack, a grizzled Australian. They crewed her, along with James, a native of Belize City who kept his hair in dreadlocks. The ship was spotless, a huge undertaking for just 3 men. Jack was a perfectionist and also protective of Teresa. He welcomed me grudgingly, but I got him to warm up as I asked all the right questions about his ship. Soon he saw me as a fellow sailor, and we got along famously. They usually dropped Teresa off and stayed a couple of days to make sure everything was all right, then spent the rest of their time shuttling medical supplies to the other clinics on the coast, and sometimes acting as an ambulance transporting patients to the medical center in Belize City. Dulcinea was fitted out like a miniature hospital, with its own operating room and clinic. A ship its size required nonstop maintenance. They needed at least one more reliable crew member. I volunteered, but that was vetoed by Teresa. Not until I say so. She laughed. Would she really let me join her crew? I wondered about the authorities. No one had come by to talk to me yet. I probably needed to go to the U.S. Embassy to get help and maybe find out who I am. But did I want to? I was perfectly content. Even my head had ceased to ache, and my hair was starting to grow back. I had a small but growing collection of hats, and I was feeling positively human again. The evening before our departure for Belize City, Teresa and I were strolling, her arm through mine. It was a perfect tropical evening, with a bit of breeze from the water and the smell of the ocean in the air. We were playing the Identify the Boat game, which seemed to amuse her. That one? She pointed at a beautiful single-masted sailor. That's a 43-foot Northwind deck saloon cruiser. I stopped and stared. Bells were chiming in my memory banks. What's wrong? Tears stung my eyes. She turned to me and put her arms around my waist and looked up at me with those wonderful green eyes. That was my boat, and she pushed herself against me and hugged me tightly. And she's gone. Her head against my chest, she said. I'm so sorry. Me too. I guess I was pretty attached to her. I can see why. She's beautiful. I don't know how long we stood there gazing at that boat. I didn't tell her that I had a terrible feeling that it was my fault my boat was gone. We walked much of the way back to the clinic in silence, and for the first time holding hands. All too soon we were in front of the little peach-colored stucco house she called home while she was in Punta Gorda. We both turned at the same time, and just like that we kissed. It wasn't planned, at least not on my part. It just happened. Her lips were soft and warm, and contained the promise of a lot more. When we finally broke apart, there were no uncomfortable moments. I just folded her in my arms. It felt so right, just as if I had been holding her forever. Teresa, whatever forces brought me here to you, I thank them. I kissed her this time. My eyes were closed, but I suspected we were sending off sparks from every place our bodies touched. After a couple of minutes, she broke the kiss, her green eyes flashing in the meager light from the porch. I thank them too, she whispered. She kissed me before she went inside and said, "Good night, my Nemo." I practically skipped back to the clinic. I sat on the porch for a while watching the moon rise. I could now trace my life because of that boat. How many boats like that one in the bay existed, especially if registered in the U.S.? I was sure there was a database somewhere. There probably weren't more than 50 worldwide. I could find me. Somehow that made me sad. I loved being her Nemo. I didn't want any other life except to be loved by and love Teresa. The next morning I said goodbye to Nurse Maria. We had become friends. She cried as she handed me my small canvas bag filled with all my worldly goods. 3 cotton shirts, a pair of jeans, 3 baseball hats, and some underwear and socks. I went down the steps where Teresa was waiting, and we walked hand in hand toward the pier where I had started my visit to Punta Gorda. I heard Maria call me. Senor Nemo. She ran up to us and handed me a cell phone. It was an iPhone with a rubber protector around it. I almost forgot this. You had it in your pocket. She pointed to the side pocket of my khaki cargo shorts. I found it when I went to wash your shorts and I put it in the drawer in the stand by your bed. I looked at Teresa. She shrugged. Gracias, Maria. She smiled and waved us on. I took Teresa's hand. Would you really hire me to crew your boat? She stopped and her green eyes searched my face. I'd like that very much. I smiled. Then it's a deal. She gave me a quick kiss to seal the bargain. We went down to the Zodiac grinning like happy children. When we got seated, she said, your iPhone probably got pretty wet, but I've got a charger on board that we can try. Maybe by some miracle. I sat and turned it over and over in my hand, feeling threatened by its existence. Plus, I know a man in Belize City who does wonders retrieving data from waterlogged phones. She didn't seem any happier than I did. As we headed for Dulcinea, I peeled off the protective cover. I knew there was no sense in turning it on. The battery had to be long dead. I flipped it over and saw laminated to the silver back a business card. I didn't look at it. Teresa saw the card and her face betrayed her emotions. You sure my memory will come back? Yes. I flung the phone as far as I could throw it. Its silver and plastic reflected the sun as it arched through the air. It hardly made a splash as it landed and sank from sight. Teresa laughed. I joined her. An hour later, we were on board Dulcinea, and Jack had us clear of the barrier reef and sailing north toward Belize City. He asked if I'd like to take the helm. I happily agreed and quickly replaced him at the wheel. Teresa joined me as the sails caught the wind. Dulcinea handled like a dream, and I had no trouble keeping her with the wind. Teresa moved behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist. We laughed with the joy of the day and the feel of the wind and water. Susan Wallace sat in her doctor's office waiting to be summoned for her annual physical. It seemed somehow fitting that exactly a year after Chris's disappearance, she was going to be poked and prodded in a clinic. Disappearance? Why couldn't she say death? There had been no sign of him since he sailed away that Friday in October a year ago. She stared at the copy of the Winslow Homer painting on the wall of the waiting room. It showed a sailboat tossed in a storm. A tear dropped on the glossy travel magazine she had picked up from the low table in front of her. She thought about that terrible day. Mrs. Wallace, it's Petty Officer Barnes from Galveston Coast Guard. Have you found my husband? She practically shouted into the phone. She tried to calm herself. It was Tuesday afternoon, and she had not eaten or slept since the call from the Coast Guard the day before. The news that Chris had most likely been caught in the storm that had now passed over Florida, coupled with the packet of papers that rested on the dining room table, still unopened, had sent her into an emotional downward slide. After the man from Out of the Rain had delivered the divorce papers, because that's what they were, she was certain, she had sat on that cold floor stunned and overwhelmed. Her brain refused to process all that had happened. She didn't know how long she sat there, but eventually she wandered sobbing into the living room and then through the house. She wanted to scream and tear at her hair. She had never felt so helpless and lost in her life. She finally went to the liquor cabinet and poured herself a generous amount of Chris's Jack Daniels. She was filled with regret and despair. Her stupidity and vanity and insecurities had put her man in mortal danger, and for what? There was no love with Ethan Parker. How could she have done this to the only man she ever loved and would ever love? She called Rachel and Laura. After tear-filled conversations, they promised to get the next plane home. So on Tuesday afternoon, she waited to hear the news from the petty officer on the phone, her stomach in knots. Ma'am, a helicopter with a crew returning to their oil platform spotted your husband's boat. Her heart leapt. There was no sign of anyone on board. Her legs collapsed, and she sat back onto the sofa. Are they sure? Well, no, ma'am, but they did a couple of low passes, and there was no response. They said the boat was pretty beat up and drifting. She couldn't hold back a sob. Ma'am, he could be in the cabin, maybe asleep and didn't hear. We've got a cutter that should reach him in about an hour. Please call me back as soon as they get to him. She sobbed. Yes, ma'am, just as soon as they report in. The next 2 hours were the longest of her life. She paced and she sat. She curled up in a ball on the couch as she cried, and then she paced some more. Why wouldn't the phone ring? Her daughters called her on her cell, and she asked them to take taxis home. She couldn't leave the phone. They were both there when the call came, and she put his voice on the speakerphone. Mrs. Wallace, this is Lieutenant Johnson from Coast Guard Station Galveston. Cutter Thompson reported that upon boarding your husband's boat, the Lady Diana, they found no sign of him. Somehow, she found herself on the floor being held by Laura. Mrs. Wallace? Rachel answered. Lieutenant Johnson, I'm sorry, my mother can't talk right now. Was there any sign of his Zodiac? Let me check. Please hang on. After what seemed a very long time, he came back on the phone. I checked with the Thompson. They confirmed there was no sign of a Zodiac. Thank you for checking. Ms. Wallace, was your father an experienced sailor? Yes. Well, we've got 3 planes up now, and we'll put out an alert with search and rescue and the oil rigs to be on the lookout for his Zodiac. Thank you. We'll keep in touch. Of course, there was no more word. Chris had disappeared. Susan has little recollection of the next month. There were vague memories of a memorial service. Rachel told her later that hundreds of people had packed the church. She just remembered being in a fog. One thing she did remember was a shouting match over the phone with Chris's attorney at Bateman and Thomas. Actually, it was she who did the shouting. Chris's attorney was very blunt and unmovable. She had never met him but knew him by reputation as one ruthless a-hole. He insisted that absent a certificate of death, or in Florida, a presumption of death certificate, that the divorce action would continue. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. He's missing somewhere out in the Gulf, and you want to keep pressing the divorce? She yelled into the phone. Mr. Wallace has not instructed us to desist, so we will go forward. I'll fight you on this. Your choice, Mrs. Wallace. As long as there's no presumption of death or certificate of death, we will continue with this action. She had filed a response to the petition and at the preliminary hearing had convinced the judge to grant a 6-month stay in the proceedings, despite the arguments of Chris's attorney. She just couldn't bring herself to have him declared dead. In her gut, she still felt a connection to Chris, and after 23 years of marriage, she just knew that she wasn't deluding herself that he was still alive. Susan threw herself into her job. She couldn't stand to be in their large empty home. It still had all the trappings of their life together, but without Chris it was as empty as her soul. Both Rachel and Laura had offered to move home, but she declined even though she ached for company. At their urging, she began to see a therapist. With her help, she managed to start her life again one day at a time. Early in December, she'd received a phone call from Joe Turner, their insurance agent. Susan, sorry it's taken so long to get back to you. Susan didn't remember an initial conversation. But, I'm getting ready to put a check in the mail for the Lady Diana. It took some time to locate her, and then to have one of our agents in Mobile go look at her to see how much damage there was. And then our home office had to decide if there was salvage value. Well, it's all a bit complicated, but like I said, your check will be coming soon. Susan was stunned. Joe? Yes. I'm confused. Tell me again what you said. Oh, sorry if I wasn't clear. But I'll have a check to you for Diana's insured value soon. No. Something about someone in Mobile going to look at her? Yes. She's in Mobile, and we had to send... Wait, Diana's in Alabama? Yes. How? I thought... Well, I don't know. I guess I didn't realize she was still afloat. Oh yes. Seems like it took forever to locate her too. How did she get there? Not sure. Let me check. She heard clicking on a keyboard. I have the report here. He paused. According to our representative in Mobile, when Lady Diana was boarded by Coast Guard cutter Thompson, they put a large pump on board and got her seaworthy again, and a tug from one of the platforms in the Gulf took her in tow. It was going back to Galveston, but got diverted to Mobile, so that's how she ended up there. But how did you know she was even still afloat to start looking? Well, after you and I spoke in late October, you mentioned something about a Coast Guard cutter boarding her looking for Chris. Well, then it was a matter of following up. Although the Coast Guard was convinced as she was in Galveston. Finally, I tracked down the tug, and after a long search of Mobile Bay by our agent, well, there she was. But what's going to happen to her? Well, after you accept payment and relinquish title, we'll try to sell her. Although these days I doubt we'll get much more than pennies on the dollar. She's in pretty rough shape. We'd probably just settle for payment of the mortgage fees in Mobile. Joe, could I buy her? Don't see why not. But Susan, from the description, it's going to take tens of thousands of dollars to put her in any kind of shape to sail again. Joe, I can't just leave her to rot in Mobile, or have her bought by someone who'll strip her, or leave her as just another abandoned hulk somewhere. Chris loved the Diana, and I'd like to have her. So Susan bought Lady Diana. She vividly remembered seeing Diana the day she arrived on a flatbed from Mobile. Tears rolled down Susan's cheeks as she looked at her. Diana was a mess. Her masts were stripped, and there was a gash in her starboard side, just above the waterline. Her pristine white hull was filthy, and her wood decks were fouled with salt and grime. The interior was the worst. The autumn heat and humidity in Mobile, and the water that had collected from the voyage, and from sitting outside in the rain, caused everything inside to be covered in mold. The smell of rot permeated her. There was lots of work to do, and the task was daunting. Susan moved Diana to a rented warehouse near the water. As she stood in the warehouse feeling hopeless and missing Chris terribly, she heard a car approach. Soon she saw a tall, distinguished-looking Hispanic man in a dark suit, get out of the back of a large black Buick. He was maybe 50, although he had some gray at his temples. A younger man with sunglasses got out of the passenger side. He wore an open collar shirt with a light-colored sport jacket. He looked around. The older man approached. Mrs. Wallace, I apologize for not contacting you sooner. I am a friend of your husband's, and we did business together. I wish to offer my condolences. I'm sorry I was unable to attend his memorial service. Pressing business kept me away, but I understand he had many friends. He is greatly missed. Susan looked at him, puzzled. She thought she knew most of Chris's friends. Although this man said they did business together, so maybe they'd never met. Thank you, mister? Oh, forgive me. Everyone just calls me Tio. He smiled, but his dark eyes were hard. The younger man never stopped scanning the area. Well, Mr. Tio, please, just Tio. She nodded. What can I do for you? I think you misunderstand. I owe Chris a great debt, and so I am here to offer my services to you. I don't understand. Mrs. Wallace, if there is anything you need, or if you have any problems, please come to me. He reached inside his suit jack and pulled out a very expensive-looking reptile wallet. From it he took a thick white business card. She noticed the printing was embossed. The card simply had a telephone number on it. She had to admit she was shocked. How did Chris know this man? He looked like he was from the Florida underworld, bodyguard and all. And what had Chris done to have this man owe him a great debt? Tio looked at the boat. A great shame. She was very beautiful. What will you do? She turned and looked at Lady Diana. I had some notion I would restore her, but that was before I saw her in all this. She waved her arm in the direction of Diana. He nodded. Now I'm overwhelmed. Mrs. Wallace, if you will permit me, I know a very reputable man who restores boats. Suddenly she felt a small ray of hope. Yes? I would be happy to have him contact you. And I know his prices are very reasonable, plus his work is impeccable. Thank you, Mr. Tio. I would like that. May he call you today? Yes. That would be fine. Thank you. Then it is settled. For the first time, she allowed herself to smile. Please remember, if there is anything I can do for you or your daughters, please do not hesitate to contact me. Thank you. I'll remember. He nodded, and then he was gone. She looked at his card again, and then realized she had not given him her number to pass along to the man who might restore the Lady Diana. 5 minutes later, her cell phone rang, and an hour later, she had a contract for the restoration work. It wasn't going to be cheap, but it wasn't near what she expected. Jorge Hernandez had climbed all over Diana and had drawn up a detailed estimate in a little over an hour. He was a tall, thin man with a graying mustache, now dressed in filthy overalls from his tour around and through the boat. We can start tomorrow if you wish. The next day, Jorge arrived with a crew of 5 and set to work, and Susan tried to drop by every day to see how things were going. It wasn't that she worried about Jorge and crew doing a good job, but she was suddenly impatient to have the job complete and Diana back in the water where she belonged. Chris would approve. Work caused her to miss visiting Diana for a few days, so it was 2 days before Christmas when she next looked in. She could already see a vast improvement. Just outside the warehouse was a pile of waterlogged and moldy carpet. She thought she recognized it from the main cabin. When she went inside the building, she noticed the gash in the hull had been repaired. There was a fresh fiberglass patch which contrasted greatly with the dingy white hull. Jorge greeted her warmly. Sonora Wallace, how are you today? Mr. Hernandez, I am well. How are you? He gave her a tour of the exterior, and as they walked around the boat which sat high in its cradle, she was amazed at the progress. There was the loud sound of a power tool somewhere up above. He told her they had begun work on the interior, and the decks were being refinished. Of course the hull would be repainted. He asked if she wanted any color besides white. No, I want it just the way it is in the photo. When they finished their tour, he pulled something from inside of a front pocket of his overalls. He opened his large hand, and Susan was astonished to see Chris's wedding ring. It gleamed in the light from the windows set high up in the walls of the warehouse. Miguel found this while pulling the carpet from the main cabin. Do you recognize it? Her hand shook as she took the ring. She had to fight the blackness that threatened to overwhelm her. Tears streaked her cheeks. Somehow she found herself sitting on a metal folding chair near the desk Jorge had moved into the warehouse. A very concerned Jorge stood over her, offering a bottle of water. She slowly shook her head as the tears flowed. Chris had taken off his ring before he had left Diana. My God, she thought, how he must have hated her at that moment. With the storm all around him, abandoning his sinking boat, to take the time to remove his ring and drop it in the cabin. She got unsteadily to her feet and made her way to her car, the ring clutched tightly in her hand. She politely refused Jorge's offer of assistance. Her hand shook so violently she couldn't get the key in the ignition. Suddenly, the young man who accompanied Tio at their first and only meeting opened her car door. "Mrs. Wallace, I'm here to take you home." He looked quite concerned. Susan looked behind him and saw a black Suburban. She took his outstretched hand, and he helped her from her car. She couldn't bring herself to tell Rachel or Laura about the ring. Her therapist kept her going, as did the amazing progress on the Diana, but her heart was breaking. That custom-made woven gold ring represented all that she had betrayed in her marriage. Christmas was the worst. Of course the girls were home, but she spent much of the day in tears. It was the first time in 23 years she was without Chris, and it was excruciating. Late that evening she slipped from the house and drove to the warehouse where Diana was waiting. She climbed the tall ladder and sat in the cockpit and drank from the bottle of champagne she had brought with her. She quietly toasted Chris. "Merry Christmas, my love." She woke before dawn, stiff and cramped, but more at peace than any other time in the months since Chris's disappearance. She knew that her sanity was tied to this boat and that she would learn to sail her again. Right after the new year, Susan started sailing refresher classes. She, like Chris, grew up around boats, but most of the time she paid little attention. She had learned to sail but didn't have the passion and love of it Chris did. This time she buckled down and learned, quickly making progress as the Diana made progress. The blue-green waters of the Gulf became her solace, and more she ventured out alone, honing her skills and finding the comfort of the wind and salt water. Her work was still challenging and busy, but she no longer put it above all else. The boats she rented made her impatient to begin sailing Diana. The only event of note that January was the death of Ethan Parker. Inexplicitly, he had left the firm at the beginning of December, and then early in January, on one rain-lashed night near Raleigh, North Carolina, he drove his bike off the highway and was killed. The only reason anyone even knew about it was because of the police investigation about his drug use. They said that a combination of speed and alcohol and cocaine caused his death. Susan did not mourn. Few others did either. She was a bit surprised that he had ended up that way. The whole time he was with the firm, he prided himself in staying in shape. Publicly and privately, she knew he always avoided drugs and drank only in moderation. Maybe he had changed. Ethan had tried to contact her not long after Chris's disappearance, but she had firmly and unequivocally rebuffed him. She also told him exactly what she thought of him. Fortunately, he had received the message. Once he left the firm, she never saw him again. She had heard he had trouble finding a job and moved out of state. His parting words to her were, "Lots of other fish in the sea." No, Susan did not mourn. He was a predator, and his death probably saved any number of foolish women from making the mistake she did. Soon it was spring, and with great fanfare, at least from Susan's daughters and Jorge's smiling crew, the Lady Diana slipped gracefully back into welcoming waters of the harbor. The three of them took a week over spring break and sailed down the coast to the Keys. It was a wonderful time, and she was happy, at least outwardly, especially when the girls were around. Diana seemed happy too. She kept thinking how proud Chris would be seeing them crewing the Diana, although the tiny bikinis they all wore might have given him a heart attack. Susan sat in her doctor's office and smiled at that memory and at the recollections of the last several months as she sailed the Lady Diana. It was as if a part of Chris was with her each time she was on board. Her life had changed too. She finally gave in and applied for and received a presumption of death certificate. That allowed her to settle lots of matters and to finally get the pending divorce action dismissed. She was surprised to get a refund from Bateman and Thomas. Chris must have given them a very large retainer. Other than the fact they were jerks, no wonder they were so damned aggressive. She had taken to riding Chris's Harley to Diana's birth. The large bike perfectly complemented her new self, and like Diana, it was a connection to Chris. And her relationship with her daughters improved. She had been so busy while they were growing up that it seemed they became women while she wasn't looking. That saddened her. She knew Chris was always there for them, and perhaps that was all the excuse she needed to become an absent mother. She had missed a lot and vowed to be a large part of their lives from now on. She knew that was especially important with Laura. Laura's knowledge or the affair had strained their relationship. Susan worked hard to repair it, and fortunately Laura got to the point where she could forgive her mother, although Susan knew Laura still blamed her for Chris's death. Yes, she finally thought it. The word death. It was so final. Even after a year, she would come into the house and expect to find him there. There was no question of finding a replacement for Chris. He was all the man she ever needed. But she blew it. She had no one to blame but herself. Chris would not have been out on the Diana if it hadn't been for her stupidity and vanity. Her therapist said she'd get better eventually. Susan knew she would always carry this guilt. Why had Chris abandoned the Diana? Things must have looked very bad at the time. Had he only stayed with her, she could have got him home. Why? And now Lady Diana was hers, and she had changed from an accusatory presence to her salvation. Susan tried to put those thoughts of the past year aside as she picked up the travel magazine again. She wasn't planning a trip. Where would she go without Chris anyway? As she vacantly leafed through the magazine, she saw one article entitled, "A Doctor in Belize," over the photo of a beautiful smiling dark-haired woman sitting in the sunshine in a rattan chair on a long covered porch. Behind her was a whitewashed stucco wall. Susan glanced at the photo, wondering if she was interested in reading the article, or if she had time before she was called for her appointment. She decided she really wasn't interested and turned the page. Then she stopped. Something in the background of the photo had finally registered. She turned back to the page. There it was, or he was. There was a man standing in the background. He was leaning against the wall a few feet down the porch, arms crossed, dressed in khaki shorts and shirt, wearing a pair of green aviators and a smile. He was obviously watching the pretty woman. Susan's heart leapt. It was Chris. Could it be? Because he was in the background, he was slightly out of focus. But everything about him said it was Chris, especially that smile. Susan sat back in the chair in the quiet waiting room, her heart racing and feeling faint at the same time. How could it be? How could he have made it there? The Zodiac certainly didn't have the range. Someone must have picked him up. Then she had a darker thought. Had he arranged it? That was quickly dispelled. No, he loved Lady Diana, and when he left Venice the storm had been on a different track. Susan had also seen the hole in her bow. No, she was convinced that Chris had left her only after all other alternatives had been exhausted. Another thought intruded. Why hadn't he contacted anyone? Did he hate her that much? He could have at least let Laura and Rachel know. What had happened, and why was he in Belize at that clinic? Had he been hurt? He looked perfectly healthy, tanned and in great shape, maybe thinner than before, but unmistakably the man she loved. She quickly scanned the article, looking for any mention of the man on the porch. The article concentrated on California-trained surgeon Dr. Teresa Delgado and her work in Belize. At the end it referenced a URL which would provide more information. Susan took her notebook computer from her bag and plugged in her mobile broadband card and then typed in the address. Soon she was listening to reporter Roland Aston as he interviewed Dr. Delgado on the hospital ship Dulcinea. Dr. Delgado was sitting on the roof of the aft cabin, facing forward, the wind ruffling her dark hair. Her polo shirt and khaki shorts did nothing to hide her slim athletic figure. Susan listened as the vivacious young woman described her life in Belize and how a recent anonymous benefactor had made all their lives easier by providing money to help build and remodel clinics along the coast of Belize. She was very excited about all the possibilities of bringing first-class healthcare to the tiny nation. Near the end of the interview, Roland asked, "And what about your crew? Who's the gentleman back there at the helm?" Dr. Delgado smiled. The camera panned over her shoulder and zoomed in on Chris. Yes, it was her Chris. He was hatless and his hair was longer and sun-bleached, and he wore the same sunglasses, but he was unmistakable. Chris didn't know he was being filmed. His concentration was on sailing the large ship. He looked remarkably happy as he stood behind that large wheel, wearing the same khaki outfit she saw in the photo in the article. The camera returned to Dr. Delgado's face as she turned from looking at Chris. Susan's heart sank. The young doctor smiled as she faced the camera. Her eyes had a dreamy look. "That's my Captain Nemo. He takes care of everything." There was no mistake. Her eyes said it all. Her look was that of love. Oh my God. Dr. Delgado is in love with my Chris, Susan thought. Susan called Laura and gave her the site and asked her to look at the clip. She tried to stay calm when talking to her daughter, but her excitement rose by the second. She was sure it was Chris. Laura was excited too, and she said she had her laptop with her and have a look and call her back. She went to the receptionist and canceled her appointment and practically ran to her Mercedes, a plan formulating. Her phone rang. "It's him. I know it's Dad. How'd he get there?" Then she paused. "Why didn't he contact us?" Susan could tell she was crying. "I don't know, Laura." She winced as she admitted. "I can see why he might not want to contact me. I'm sorry, honey. This mess is all my fault." Laura was silent for a little bit, then she said, "Mom, I just want him to come home." "Me too, Laura. Me too." She sighed as she started her car and heard the Stones singing "You Can't Always Get What You Want" on the radio. She hoped it wasn't prophetic. She had lots to do. She was glad Laura hadn't said anything about Dr. Teresa Delgado. A week later, Susan picked up her iPhone. "Hi, Laura." "Hi, Mom. So where are you?" "I'm just clearing the entrance to the Intercoastal. Glad I caught you then. I wish I was going along." "Don't worry. I'll be fine. I need to do this myself since I caused this mess. It'll be better if I see him alone anyway. I still wish I was going along. How long will it take? Oh, I'd say probably 8 or 9 days, maybe less. Looks like I'll have some great easterlies. No bad weather anywhere in the Gulf, and the storm season is just about over. Nervous? Scared to death? About the trip? You know better than that? Please tell Dad we miss him and want him to come home. Okay? You can count on it. Susan had many doubts, but she wouldn't let her daughter know. After watching the video a number of times, she couldn't shake the fact that Chris was happy. He was sailing a magnificent ship in the company of a woman who loved him. That could have been them on the Diana had she ever put aside her selfishness and ego. What had all her work accomplished? She had a big house, a nice expensive car, but no Chris. A couple of times she almost canceled her trip. She thought about just leaving them alone in their happiness. Could she make that sacrifice for Chris? But then she'd think about how she ached for him and decided she wouldn't give up without at least seeing him one more time. She wanted desperately to tell him how sorry she was and ask for forgiveness. She'd have lots of time on the voyage to think about how she'd approach him and what to say. If nothing else, the girls wanted him back in their lives. 23 years had to count for something. Got to go, Laura. Time to set the sails. I love you, Mom. Be safe. I love you too, Laura. I'll see you soon. Soon, the Lady Diana caught the wind, and all that remained was the soothing sound of wind and water as the boat glided effortlessly through the blue-green waters of the Gulf. Standing in the cockpit, Susan kept the Diana close to the wind, maximizing her speed. For the first time in months, she felt gloriously alive. The rush of exhilaration bubbled over, and she shouted with unrestrained joy, "Come on, Diana. Let's go get our man." The Diana surged forward, responding like the spirited thoroughbred she was, cutting through the waves with purpose. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.